Why did God plant a tree in the middle of paradise that he knew would lead to humanity's downfall? This is the question that has puzzled theologians, philosophers, and everyday believers for thousands of years, and it's at the very heart of the Eden story. We're diving deep into the complete narrative of the Garden of Eden, and I mean complete. We'll explore the creation of Adam and Eve, the mysterious tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the serpent's deception, and the moment paradise was lost forever. But we'll also uncover the hidden meanings, the prophetic symbols, and the hope that was planted even in the midst of humanity's greatest tragedy. But before we begin, if you enjoy these stories, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue creating more content to help you pass the time or unwind. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? The morning light dims. A sword of fire blocks the path behind them. Two figures walk away from what was once their home, their footsteps heavy on unfamiliar ground. The woman looks back once. The man keeps his eyes forward. Neither speaks. This is the moment everything changed, not just for them, but for everyone who would come after. The first goodbye to paradise. The first step into a world where death would follow life, where thorns would grow beside roses, where love would know loss. Picture this scene. A garden gate closing forever, angels with flaming swords standing guard, the sound of weeping carried on the wind, two people who once walked with God now walking alone into shadows they had never known existed. But this story doesn't begin with endings. It begins before time itself, when darkness covered the deep and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. It begins with words that would shape reality. Let there be light. The ripples from that first disobedience would spread like circles on still water. Every human heart that has ever known shame traces back to this moment. Every struggle between right and wrong echoes this first choice. Every longing for something better, something pure, something lost remembers this garden. You see it in every culture, every myth, every fairy tale. The golden age that slipped away. The perfect place we can't quite remember but somehow know we've lost. The door that closed behind us, leaving us searching for the way back home. This is where it all began, where humanity learned what it meant to choose, where the first tears fell on earth that had never known sorrow, where love first learned the meaning of loss. The man's name was Adam, meaning from the earth. The woman's name was Eve, meaning living. Together they carried the weight of every choice their children would ever make. Together, they walked into a world where nothing would ever be quite the same. The garden they left behind was more than beautiful. It was perfect. Rivers flowed without flooding, trees grew without dying, animals lived without fear. And in the center of it all, two trees stood waiting. One offered life forever. The other promised knowledge of good and evil. They chose knowledge. They chose to know what they had lost. And in that knowing, they lost everything they had known. The flaming sword still guards the way back. But something in the human heart remembers. Something in us still searches for that garden, that peace, that perfect morning when all was well. Something in us still believes that maybe somehow we can find our way back home. This is their story. This is our story. This is the story of paradise lost and the long journey to find it again. In the beginning, creation unfolds before there was anything, there was everything. Not matter, not energy, not space, not time, just the fullness of God, complete and perfect and alone. And then, in a moment that exists outside of moments, the word spoke. Let there be light. Imagine the first sunrise that ever was. Not the sun rising over mountains or oceans, because those didn't exist yet. Just light itself, pure and clean and new, pushing back darkness that had never been pushed back before. The very first dawn, painted across nothing and making it something. The voice that spoke was gentle but absolute, creative but not chaotic, powerful but not violent. Each word brought order from emptiness, beauty from void, life from stillness. Let there be a firmament, and the heavens stretched out like a canvas, blue and vast and waiting. Sky separated from sky, creating space for everything that would come. Let the waters gather. And seas found their shores, rivers their paths, springs their sources. Water the source of life, pooling and flowing and waiting for the creatures that would need it. Day by day, word by word, the foundation of everything took shape. Dry land appeared, rich and dark and fertile. Plants pushed up through soil that had never felt rain, their roots finding nourishment in earth that had never known seasons. The sun and moon took their places, marking time that had never been marked before. Day and night, light and shadow, rhythm and rest. The stars scattered across the darkness like seeds of light, each one placed with purpose, each one shining for the first time. The waters began to move with life. Fish swam in oceans that had never known swimming. Whales sang songs that had never been sung. Dolphins played in waves that had never been ridden. Every creature perfectly suited to its home, every home perfectly suited to its creatures. The sky filled with wings. Birds that had never flown took to air that had never been flown through. Songs that had never been sung filled the morning. Nests that had never been built appeared in trees that had never sheltered them. The earth grew warm with life. Creatures great and small walked on ground that had never felt footsteps. Lions that had never hunted played with lambs that had never feared. Bears that had never hibernated enjoyed spring that had never ended. Everything was good. Not just adequate, not just functional, but good in the deepest sense. Beautiful beyond description, perfect beyond improvement, complete beyond addition. And yet something was missing. Someone was missing. The stage was set, but the main character had not yet appeared. The garden was planted, but the gardener had not yet arrived. The home was ready, but the family had not yet moved in. The Creator looked at everything that had been made and saw that it was good. But one thing was not yet good. One thing was still missing. The earth was ready for its caretaker. The animals were ready for their namer. The garden was ready for its keeper. The time had come to make man. Dust and breath, the making of man. God knelt in the dust. Picture this. The creator of galaxies, the voice that spoke light into existence, the hand that hung the stars, bending down to touch the earth. Not commanding from a distance, but working with his hands like a potter at his wheel. The dust was ordinary, the same dust that covered the ground, that blew in the wind, that would one day cover everything again. Nothing special about it, nothing that would make anyone think it could become something precious. But in the Creator's hands, dust became clay. Clay became form, form became man. Slowly, carefully, with infinite attention to detail, the first human body took shape. Every finger formed with purpose. Every muscle designed for strength and grace. Every bone shaped to bear weight and bend with flexibility. The heart that would pump blood, the lungs that would breathe air, the brain that would think thoughts no animal had ever thought. The body was perfect, beautiful in its proportions, strong in its design, ready for everything it would need to do. But it was still just clay. Still just dust shaped by divine hands, still lifeless, still silent, still waiting. Then came the moment that changed everything. God breathed into the man's nostrils the breath of life. Not just air, but the very breath of God. Not just oxygen, but the life force of the Creator himself. The first human chest rose, the first human heartbeat, the first human eyes opened, the first human breath was drawn from the same lungs that would one day speak words of love, cry tears of joy, laugh at children playing, sing songs of worship. Adam's name means from the earth, but he was far more than earth now. He was earth touched by heaven, dust animated by divine breath, clay filled with the life of God. He was the bridge between the physical and the spiritual, the material and the eternal. He sat up. He looked around. He saw colors no animal could see, understood beauty no creature could appreciate, felt wonder no other being could experience. He was alone in the garden, but not yet lonely. He was new to existence, but not confused. He was fully alive, completely aware, perfectly content. The first humans stood on legs that had never walked and found they knew how to walk. He opened his mouth and found he knew how to speak. He looked at his hands and found they knew how to touch, to hold, to create. Everything about him was perfectly designed for relationship. With the earth, he would tend. With the animals, he would name. With the Creator who had formed him. And with someone else, someone who didn't exist yet, but whom his heart was already missing without knowing why. Adam was the first person to see a sunset, the first to feel grass under his feet, the first to taste water, the first to breathe air, the first to know that he was alive, that he existed, that he mattered. He was alone, but not yet aware of loneliness. He was innocent, but not ignorant. He was human, but not yet fully human. That would come later when he found his other half, when he discovered what it meant to love and be loved. For now, he was simply Adam, the first man, the crown of creation, the being for whom everything else had been made, who was made for everything else. Dust and breath, earth and heaven, the first human soul awakening in paradise. Eden, paradise designed. The garden was not accidental. Every tree placed with purpose, every stream flowing exactly where it should, every path winding toward perfect destinations. This was not wilderness, but paradise. Not nature left to itself, but nature perfected by its creator. The name Eden means delight, pleasure, bliss, a place designed to bring joy to every sense, peace to every heart, fulfillment to every desire. Not just beautiful, but perfect in its beauty. Not just pleasant, but paradise in the truest sense. Rivers flowed from Eden to water the garden. 4 rivers, each with its own name, its own path, its own purpose. The Pishon, winding through lands rich with gold. The Gihon, flowing through regions of precious stones. The Tigris, running toward the east. The Euphrates, the great river that would one day see the rise and fall of empires. But here in the beginning, they were simply water. Pure, clean, life-giving water flowing through a land that had never known drought, never known flood, never known anything but perfect abundance. The trees were beyond description. Every variety imaginable, and some that could only exist in paradise. Fruit trees heavy with sweet abundance. Shade trees with leaves that never fell. Flowering trees that bloomed without seasons, each one perfectly placed, perfectly sized, perfectly beautiful. And in the center of the garden, 2 trees stood apart from all the others. The tree of life, whose fruit would sustain life forever. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, whose fruit carried a warning that would echo through eternity. The grass was always green, the flowers never wilted, the air was always sweet with the scent of blossoms that never faded. The temperature was always perfect, never too hot, never too cold. The light was always gentle, never harsh, never dim. Animals moved through the garden without fear. Lions lay down with lambs, bears played with deer, wolves ran with rabbits. There was no predator and prey, no hunter and hunted. Every creature was perfectly content, perfectly peaceful, perfectly at home. The garden was large enough for exploration, but small enough to feel intimate. Paths led to discoveries that never ended. Clearings opened to views that never stopped surprising. Hills rose to heights that never felt dangerous. Valleys dipped to depths that never felt dark. This was humanity's first home, the place where man was meant to live, to work, to rest, to wonder. A place where every need was met before it was felt, where every desire was satisfied before it was spoken. Adam walked through this paradise with the authority of a king and the wonder of a child. Everything was his to explore, his to enjoy, his to care for. The garden was his domain, his responsibility, his joy. He learned the names of plants that had never been named. He discovered fruits that had never been tasted. He found places that had never been seen. He was the first tourist in paradise, and every day brought new wonders. The work was not toilsome. The earth yielded its abundance gladly. The plants grew without struggle. The animals responded to his care with joy. This was work as it was meant to be, creative, fulfilling, joyful. Every morning brought new light. Every evening brought peaceful rest. Every day was perfect in its length, perfect in its activities, perfect in its fulfillment. There was no boredom, no anxiety, no restlessness, only contentment, only joy, only peace. This was Eden. This was paradise. This was home as it was meant to be. The perfect place for the perfect life, designed by perfect love for the perfect happiness of the ones who would call it home. 2 trees, the test in the middle. In the heart of paradise stood 2 trees that would define the fate of humanity, not hidden in corners, not tucked away in secret places, but planted in the very center of the garden where they could not be missed, could not be forgotten, could not be ignored. The tree of life grew tall and strong, its branches reaching toward heaven, its roots running deep into the earth. Its fruit promised what every human heart would one day long for: life without end, existence without expiration, breath without final exhale. To eat from this tree meant to live forever, not just to survive, but to thrive. Not just to exist, but to experience eternal youth, eternal health, eternal joy. The fruit hung within reach, beautiful and inviting, offering everything anyone could ever want. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil stood nearby, equally beautiful, equally inviting. Its fruit looked no different from the other tree's fruit. Its leaves seemed no more or less attractive. Nothing about its appearance suggested danger or warning. But this tree carried a command. The only command given in paradise, the only restriction placed on perfect freedom, the only boundary drawn in unlimited abundance. Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, God had said, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. The warning was clear. The consequence was certain. The choice was simple. Every other tree in the garden was available. Every other fruit was permitted. Only this one tree, this one fruit, was forbidden. But why? Why place such a tree in paradise? Why create something beautiful and then forbid it? Why offer a choice that could only lead to sorrow? The answer lay in the nature of love itself. Love cannot be forced. It cannot be programmed. It cannot be guaranteed. Real love requires the freedom to choose, and freedom to choose requires the possibility of choosing wrongly. The two trees represented two paths. The tree of life offered everything God wanted to give: eternal life, perfect joy, unending fellowship. The tree of knowledge offered something different: the right to decide for oneself what was good and what was evil. Adam walked past these trees every day. He saw their fruit, smelled their fragrance, felt their shade. The forbidden tree was not hidden from him. The choice was not removed from his sight. Every day he chose obedience. Every day he chose trust. Every day he chose love. The trees were beautiful beyond description. Their fruit was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, desirable to make one wise. There was nothing obviously evil about them, nothing that would make anyone automatically avoid them. This was the test. Not a test of strength or intelligence or skill, a test of trust, a test of love, a test of whether humanity would choose to remain in relationship with their Creator or to declare independence from Him. The tree of life waited patiently. Its fruit was freely available, its gift freely offered. Eternal life hung within reach, available to anyone who chose to remain in the garden, to remain in relationship, to remain in trust. The tree of knowledge waited too. Its fruit looked just as good, just as beautiful, just as desirable, but it carried a price that no one who had never experienced death could truly understand. Every day Adam chose life. Every day he chose trust. Every day he chose love. But the choice was always there, always available, always his to make. Two trees, two paths, two destinies. All of human history would hang on what happened next. Loneliness. Adam names the world. Adam walked through paradise, and paradise was perfect. Every tree was exactly where it should be. Every stream flowed exactly as it should flow. Every flower bloomed exactly when it should bloom. Everything was right. Everything was good. Everything was beautiful. But something was missing. Not something he could name, not something he could explain, but something he could feel. A emptiness that perfect surroundings could not fill. A longing that abundant fruit could not satisfy. A need that endless beauty could not meet. God saw this need. God knew this longing. God understood this emptiness. It is not good that man should be alone, he said. The first thing in all creation that was not good, not because it was evil, but because it was incomplete. But before filling this emptiness, God gave Adam a task, a job that would help him understand what he was missing, a responsibility that would make him aware of his need. Bring the animals to me, God said. Give them names, learn who they are, understand what they need. So Adam began the great work of naming. He watched the animals come to him, pairs of them, male and female, each perfectly matched to their partner. He studied their behaviors, their characteristics, their uniqueness. The lions came first, majestic and powerful, the male with his great mane, the female sleek and graceful. Adam watched them and understood strength. He gave them a name that meant king of beasts. The eagles soared down from the heights, wings spread wide, eyes sharp and clear. Male and female, perfectly designed for flight, perfectly suited for each other. Adam watched them and understood freedom. He gave them a name that meant those who soar. The dolphins played in the streams, leaping and diving, their joy infectious. Pairs of them, male and female, perfectly happy in their watery world. Adam watched them and understood playfulness. He gave them a name that meant those who laugh. Animal after animal came to Adam. Each pair complete, each partnership perfect, each relationship fulfilling. The stallion and mare, the ram and ewe, the rooster and hen. Male and female, each designed for the other, each incomplete without the other. Adam named them all. He watched them all. He learned from them all. And slowly, gradually, he began to understand what he was missing, what he was longing for, what he needed. Every animal had a companion. Every creature had a partner. Every being had another being like itself, but different from itself. Everyone except Adam. The naming took time, days perhaps, or weeks, long enough for Adam to see pattern after pattern of companionship, long enough for him to understand that he was the only creature who walked through paradise alone. He was not lonely in the way we understand loneliness. He had never experienced the pain of isolation, the ache of abandonment, the sorrow of being forgotten, but he was beginning to understand incompleteness, beginning to sense that something was missing, beginning to feel the need for someone like himself. The work was good work. The naming was important. Each animal needed its identity, its place, its recognition. Adam was fulfilling his role as caretaker, as steward, as the one given authority over all living things. But with each name he gave, with each pair he observed, the awareness grew stronger. He was different from all the others, not just in authority, not just in intelligence, but in aloneness. He was the only one without a companion. The garden was full of life, but Adam was the only one of his kind. The world was full of relationships, but Adam had no equal. Paradise was full of joy, but Adam had no one to share it with. The naming was finished. Every creature had its identity. Every animal knew its place, and Adam understood his need. He was ready for God's next gift, ready for the companion who would complete him, ready for the other half of his heart. The deep sleep. Eve is born. God looked at Adam and saw the longing in his eyes. The work of naming was done, but the work of creating was not finished. The garden was perfect, but the man was incomplete. Paradise was ready, but the family was not yet whole. It is not good that man should be alone, God said again. I will make him a helper, comparable to him. Not a servant, not a pet, not a possession. A helper, a partner, a companion, someone like him, but different from him. Someone who would complete what he had begun. But this creation would be different from all the others. God had spoken the light into existence, had commanded the seas to gather, had called the animals into being. But for this creation, God would work more personally, more intimately, more carefully. A deep sleep fell upon Adam, not the sleep of exhaustion, for he had never been tired, not the sleep of boredom, for he had never been bored. This was a sleep of preparation, of anticipation, of divine surgery. Adam's breathing became slow and peaceful. His heartbeat grew steady and strong. His body relaxed completely, trusting in the hands that had formed him from dust. He was not unconscious, but he was not fully aware. He was in a place between waking and sleeping, between knowing and not knowing. God's hands touched Adam's side. Gentle hands, loving hands, hands that had shaped galaxies and painted sunsets. The same hands that had breathed life into clay now worked with even greater care, even deeper love. A rib was taken from Adam's side. Not just bone, but living bone. Not just matter, but the very essence of life. Part of Adam's strength, part of his substance, part of his very being. But this was not subtraction. This was multiplication. Not loss, but gain. Not taking away, but adding to. The rib that was removed from Adam's side would become something more beautiful than anything that had been made before. God's hands shaped the rib into a new form. Not the same as Adam, but perfectly complementary to Adam. Not identical, but equal. Not a copy, but a completion. Bone became bone, flesh became flesh. But this flesh was different from Adam's flesh. Softer where his was harder, curved where his was straight, graceful where his was strong, beautiful in ways that Adam's beauty could never be. The hands that had formed Adam from dust now formed Eve from life. The voice that had spoken creation into existence now breathed a new kind of life into a new kind of being. Hair grew long and beautiful. Eyes opened bright and clear. Lips curved in a smile that had never been smiled before. The first woman drew her first breath, and the world became complete. She was perfect. Not just attractive, but perfect in every way. Her body was designed to complement Adam's perfectly. Her mind was made to match his intelligence. Her heart was created to love as deeply as his could love. But she was not Adam. She was herself, unique, individual, irreplaceable. She had her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own will. She was equal to Adam in value, different from Adam in design. The sleep was ending. Adam's eyes were beginning to flutter. His breathing was changing. The moment of first meeting was approaching. Eve stood in the garden, perfect and innocent and new. She had never seen another person. She had never looked in a mirror. She had never wondered what she looked like or who she was. She simply was, and that was enough. Adam was stirring. The first man was about to meet the first woman. The first person was about to meet the second person. The first half of humanity was about to meet the second half. Paradise was about to discover what it meant to be complete. Bone of my bone, first love in Eden. Adam's eyes opened slowly, as if waking from the most peaceful sleep he had ever known. The garden looked the same. The trees stood in their perfect places. The streams flowed in their gentle paths. The flowers bloomed in their endless beauty, but something was different. Someone was different. Someone was there who had not been there before. Adam sat up, his gaze focusing on the figure standing before him. For a moment, he could not speak, could not move, could not breathe. He had named every animal, had seen every creature, had observed every living thing. But he had never seen anything like this. She was like him, but not like him. Human, but different. Familiar, but wonderfully strange. She had eyes like his eyes, but softer, hands like his hands, but more graceful, a face like his face, but more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," Adam said, his voice filled with wonder, with joy, with recognition. "She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." The first words of love ever spoken, the first declaration of recognition, the first moment of understanding that completed everything that had been incomplete. Eve smiled, and Adam's heart discovered what it meant to skip a beat. She stepped closer, and he discovered what it meant to feel nervous with joy. She spoke his name, and he discovered what it meant to hear music in a human voice. They were both naked, but they felt no shame. Shame requires knowledge of evil, understanding of imperfection, awareness of something being wrong. They knew none of these things. They saw each other as they truly were, and what they saw was perfect. Adam reached out his hand. Eve took it in hers. The first touch between human beings, the first physical connection, the first moment when two people became one in spirit while remaining two in body. They walked through the garden together, seeing everything with new eyes. The trees seemed more beautiful when shared. The flowers smelled sweeter when enjoyed together. The streams sounded more musical when heard by two sets of ears. They talked and discovered that conversation was more than communication. It was communion. It was the meeting of minds, the sharing of thoughts, the joy of being understood and understanding in return. They laughed and discovered that laughter was more than sound. It was the overflow of joy, the expression of delight, the music of two hearts beating in harmony. They worked in the garden together and discovered that work was more than accomplishment. It was cooperation. It was the joining of strengths, the sharing of responsibilities, the satisfaction of building something together. Adam showed Eve everything he had learned in his time alone. The names of the animals, the paths through the garden, the places where the best fruit grew. She learned quickly, but she also taught him things he had never known. How to see beauty with different eyes, how to appreciate grace, how to understand the softness that balanced his strength. They discovered that they were alike in the most important ways, both made in the image of God, both given breath by the Creator, both responsible for the garden, both blessed with intelligence, creativity, and love. But they were different in countless beautiful ways. Where he was strong, she was graceful. Where he was direct, she was intuitive. Where he was focused, she was perceptive. Not better or worse, but perfectly complementary. Evening came, and they watched the sunset together. The first sunset shared between two people. The first moment when the beauty of creation was multiplied by being experienced by two hearts instead of one. They slept side by side, safe in each other's presence, complete in each other's company. The first night when no one in the world was alone. The first time when rest was shared, when dreams were companioned, when sleep was blessed by love. This was love as it was meant to be. Pure, innocent, complete. No jealousy, no fear, no doubt, no secrets, no shame, no selfishness. Just two people made for each other, finding in each other everything they had been missing. Paradise was complete. The garden was home. and love had found its first expression in the perfect union of two hearts that beat as one. The serpent, enter the tempter. The garden was peaceful. Days passed in perfect harmony. Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the evening, worked together in the warm sunshine, rested together under stars that never seemed so bright. Paradise was everything it was meant to be. But something else walked in the garden. Something that had not been there in the beginning. Something that watched and waited and planned. Something that was not content with the perfect peace of Eden. The serpent was beautiful, more beautiful than any creature Adam had named. More graceful than the deer, more colorful than the peacock, more mesmerizing than the dancing lights on the water. Nothing about him seemed dangerous or threatening or wrong. He was subtle. That was his nature, his gift, his weapon. Not obvious in his intentions, not crude in his methods, not direct in his attack. He was the master of the half-truth, the expert of the twisted word, the artist of the poisoned suggestion. Where did he come from? The Bible doesn't tell us his origin story in detail, but we know he was there, in the garden, walking among the trees, watching the first couple with eyes that held more than curiosity. Some say he was once an angel, beautiful and bright, who fell from heaven like lightning. Some say he was the covering cherub, created to worship God, but choosing to worship himself instead. Some say he was Lucifer, the morning star, whose light turned to darkness when pride filled his heart. Whatever his origin, he was there now, in paradise, among the innocent, watching for opportunity, waiting for the right moment, planning the perfect approach. He was not a snake, as we know snakes. This was before the curse, before the crawling on the belly, before the eating of dust. This serpent was upright, intelligent, articulate. He could speak, he could reason, he could persuade. The other animals trusted him. Why wouldn't they? There was no reason for suspicion in paradise. No history of deception, no experience of betrayal, no knowledge of evil. The serpent was simply another creature in the garden, perhaps more interesting than most. But his thoughts were not peaceful. His intentions were not pure. His purposes were not good. He looked at the happiness of Adam and Eve, and something in him burned with jealousy. He saw their innocence, and something in him raged with envy. He witnessed their fellowship with God, and something in him twisted with hatred. He could not create, so he would corrupt. He could not build, so he would destroy. He could not love, so he would lie. He could not bring life, so he would bring death. The serpent knew the command. He had heard God's warning about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He understood the consequence of disobedience. He was aware of the choice that faced humanity every day, and he had a plan. He would not attack with force. That would be too obvious, too crude, too likely to fail. He would not threaten or intimidate. That would only drive them closer to God for protection. Instead, he would question. He would suggest. He would plant seeds of doubt. He would make them think that God was holding something back from them, that there was something better than what they had, that they deserved more than they were getting. He would twist the truth just enough to make it seem like wisdom. He would take God's words and give them a different meaning. He would make evil look like good and slavery look like freedom. The serpent was patient. He had time. He would wait for the right moment, the right circumstance, the right opportunity. He would wait until one of them was alone, vulnerable, open to suggestion. He would start with a question, just one small question. Has God indeed said? Not a direct attack on God's character, not an obvious challenge to God's authority. Just a question that would make them think, make them doubt, make them wonder. And once the question was planted, once the doubt was seated, once the suggestion was made, he would watch as they convinced themselves. He would watch as they talked themselves into disobedience. He would watch as paradise fell. The tempter was ready. The trap was set. The stage was prepared. All he needed now was the right moment, the right person, the right opportunity. Eve was walking alone in the garden. She was near the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She was looking at its fruit, perhaps wondering about the command, perhaps thinking about the warning. The serpent smiled. His moment had come. Whispers in the leaves. Eve is approached. Eve walked through the garden in the warm light of morning. Adam was working in another part of paradise, tending the trees near the eastern streams. She enjoyed these quiet moments, these times of peaceful solitude, these opportunities to think her own thoughts and see the world through her own eyes. The garden was especially beautiful today. The flowers seemed more vibrant. The birds sang more sweetly. The fruit looked more delicious than ever. Everything was perfect, as it always was. Everything was good, as it always had been. She found herself walking toward the center of the garden where the two special trees grew. The tree of life stood tall and welcoming, its fruit glistening in the sunlight. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil grew beside it, equally beautiful, equally inviting. Eve paused before the forbidden tree. She had walked past it countless times, had seen its fruit, had remembered the command. But today, something was different. Today, she found herself looking more carefully, thinking more deeply, wondering more seriously. The fruit was beautiful. There was no denying that. It looked good for food, pleasant to the eyes, desirable to make one wise. Nothing about it appeared harmful or dangerous or wrong. It looked just like any other fruit in the garden. Has God indeed said, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? The voice was smooth, cultured, intelligent. Eve turned and saw the serpent approaching, his movements graceful and non-threatening. She had seen him before, had even spoken with him on occasion. He was one of the more interesting creatures in the garden. "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden," Eve replied, "but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.'" The serpent's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. "You will not surely die," he said, his voice carrying a tone of gentle correction, as if he were sharing a secret that God had forgotten to mention. Eve looked at him with curiosity. This was the first time anyone had contradicted God's command, the first time anyone had suggested that God's word might not be absolute truth. It was a new thought, a strange, strange thought, but somehow not an immediately frightening thought. "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened," the serpent continued, "and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Like God. The words hung in the air, like fruit hanging from a branch. Eve had never thought about being like God. She had always been content to be like herself, to be human, to be Adam's companion and God's creation. But now the thought was there. The possibility was suggested. The seed was planted. What would it be like to be like God? What would it be like to know what God knows? What would it be like to have the wisdom that only God possessed? The serpent watched her face, saw the thoughts forming, saw the desire growing. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The suggestion was made, the question was planted, the temptation was offered. Eve looked at the fruit again. It was beautiful, but now it seemed more than beautiful. It seemed valuable. It seemed important. It seemed like the key to something she hadn't known she was missing. Why would God keep this from them? Why would he forbid something that could make them wiser? Why would he deny them knowledge that could make them more like him? These questions swirled in her mind like leaves in the wind. The serpent remained quiet, letting the thoughts take root. He had learned that the most effective temptation was the kind that let people convince themselves. He had planted the seed. Now he would watch it grow. "But God said we would die," Eve said, though her voice carried less certainty than before. "Look at the tree." The serpent replied gently. "Does it look like death to you? Look at the fruit. Does it appear harmful? Touch it. See if it burns your hand." Eve reached out slowly, her fingertips barely brushing the smooth skin of the fruit. Nothing happened. No lightning struck. No voice thundered from heaven. No immediate consequence followed her touch. The fruit felt normal, pleasant, inviting, just like every other fruit in the garden. "You see?" the serpent said softly. "You have touched it, and you have not died. Perhaps God's warning was not about the fruit itself. Perhaps it was about something else entirely." The doubt grew stronger. The questions multiplied. If God had been wrong about touching the fruit, might he also be wrong about eating it? If the fruit was safe to touch, might it also be safe to taste? "Think about it," the serpent continued, his voice like honey, like music, like the whisper of wind through leaves. "You and Adam are the crown of creation. You are made in God's image. Don't you deserve to have the same knowledge he has? Don't you deserve to understand what he understands?" It seemed reasonable. It felt fair. It sounded like justice. Why should God have knowledge that he refused to share? Why should they remain innocent when they could become wise? The serpent began to move away, his work nearly finished. I leave the choice to you, he said. But remember, knowledge is never truly forbidden. It can only be delayed. And delay always comes with a cost. Eve stood alone before the tree, the fruit hanging within easy reach. Her hand still tingled where she had touched it. Her mind still reeled with the questions the serpent had planted. She thought about Adam, working in another part of the garden. Should she call him? Should she share this conversation? Should she tell him about the serpent's words? But something stopped her. Something that whispered that this was her decision to make, her moment of independence, her chance to become more than she was. The fruit hung before her, beautiful and forbidden and full of promise. The serpent's words echoed in her mind. God's command seemed less certain than before. For the first time in her perfect life, Eve was truly alone with a choice, and the weight of that choice would echo through every generation that would follow. The bite, the knowledge is taken. Eve holds the fruit in her palm. Its skin gleams like polished amber in the dappled sunlight. The serpent's words echo in her mind. Surely you will not die. The promise of wisdom calls to something deep within her soul. She lifts it closer. The scent is sweet, almost intoxicating. Her fingers trace its smooth surface. Adam stands nearby, watching with curious eyes. Neither speaks. The garden around them hums with life. Birds calling, leaves rustling, water flowing over stones. The moment stretches like honey from a spoon. Everything balances on this single choice. The fruit feels warm against her skin. Eve looks at Adam, then back at the forbidden thing in her hands. Her heart beats faster. She brings it to her lips. The first bite is small, tentative. Juice runs down her chin. The taste floods her mouth, complex flavors she has never known. Sweet and bitter, familiar yet strange. Her eyes widen as she chews slowly. Something shifts inside her. A door opens that cannot close again. Knowledge flows like water breaking through a dam. She sees the fruit differently now. She sees everything differently. Adam watches her face change. Fear creeps into his expression, but also longing. Eve extends the fruit toward him without words. Her eyes plead with him to understand, to join her in this new place she has entered. He takes it from her hands. Their fingers touch briefly. The fruit passes between them like a torch in darkness. Adam looks at it, then at his wife's changed face. Love wars with obedience in his heart. He bites down hard. The taste hits him immediately, sharper than Eve experienced, more bitter. The knowledge crashes over him like a wave. His knees buckle slightly. The garden spins around him as new understanding fills his mind. They stand together in the aftermath. The fruit lies forgotten at their feet, half-eaten, its work complete. Around them, the same trees wave in the same breeze. The same sun filters through the same leaves. Yet everything has changed. Eve touches Adam's arm. He looks at her with new eyes, eyes that now see what they could not see before. The innocence that clothed them like light has vanished. They are naked, exposed, vulnerable in ways they never imagined possible. The serpent watches from the shadows, then slithers away without a sound. Its task is finished. The deed cannot be undone. What was whole has been broken. What was simple has become complex. What was pure has been stained. Neither Adam nor Eve speaks of what they have done. They cannot find words for this new reality. The garden feels different around them, larger, stranger, more dangerous. Shadows seem deeper, the light less warm. Time moves differently now. Before, each moment flowed into the next like a gentle stream. Now they feel the weight of past and future pressing down upon them. Memory carries the taste of the fruit. Anticipation brings fear of what comes next. They walk deeper into the garden, away from the tree that changed everything. Their steps are uncertain, like children learning to walk in darkness. Behind them, the tree of knowledge stands silent, its remaining fruit hanging heavy on the branches. The knowledge they sought has become a burden they must carry. Wisdom brings sorrow they did not expect. Understanding opens wounds they did not know could bleed. They are still in paradise, but paradise no longer feels like home. Evening approaches. Soon God will come walking in the cool of the day, as he always does. But this evening will be different from all others. This conversation will echo through generations yet unborn. This moment will haunt humanity until the end of time. They have eaten from the tree, and the taste will never leave their mouths. Eyes opened. Shame arrives, the knowledge settles into their bones like winter cold. Adam and Eve stand frozen beneath the tree, seeing themselves for the first time with clear eyes. The sight overwhelms them. They are naked. This truth crashes over them like thunder. Before, their bodies were simply themselves, natural, beautiful, unquestioned. Now they feel exposed, vulnerable, wrong somehow. Skin that felt like silk now burns with embarrassment. Eve crosses her arms over her chest. Adam turns slightly away from her gaze. Neither can look directly at the other anymore. These bodies that brought them joy now bring only shame. How did they never notice before? The breeze that once felt like a gentle caress now makes them shiver. Every leaf that rustles sounds like whispers. Every shadow seems to hide watching eyes. The garden that embraced them now feels like a stage where they perform for an unseen audience. They move apart from each other without thinking. Space opens between them where none existed before. The unity they shared, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, fractures like glass hitting stone. They are still two halves of one whole, but the halves no longer fit together perfectly. Adam notices things about Eve he never saw before, not just her beauty, but her otherness, her strangeness. She is like him, but not him. This difference that once delighted now disturbs. She is separate, unknowable, foreign in ways that make his heart ache. Eve sees Adam with new clarity too. His strength that once made her feel safe now intimidates. His voice that once brought comfort now carries an edge she cannot name. He looks at her differently now, with hunger mixed with judgment, desire tangled with suspicion. They hunt for covering among the plants around them. Fig leaves are large enough, broad enough to hide behind. They tear them from the branches and weave them together with clumsy fingers. The work is awkward, desperate. The leaves feel rough against their skin. They itch and scratch. The makeshift garments shift and gap, never quite covering enough. But they are better than nothing, better than the terrible exposure of naked truth. Dressed in their leafy shame, they venture deeper into the garden. Every step feels heavy. The earth beneath their feet seems harder than before. Thorns catch at their crude clothing. Stones cut their tender souls. They speak in whispers now, afraid their voices might carry too far. Words come differently than before. Each sentence requires thought, consideration. Language has become dangerous, capable of revealing too much or too little. The animals sense the change. Deer that once approached without fear now watch from a distance. Birds call from higher branches. Even the family cat eyes them warily before slinking away. The harmony between human and beast has broken along with everything else. Time crawls forward like a wounded animal. The sun that once marked pleasant hours now counts down to a reckoning they cannot avoid. God will come. He always comes in the cool of evening. What will they say? How will they explain? They practice lies in their minds, simple stories that might make this go away. But the fruit's juice still stains their lips. The knowledge still burns in their eyes. Truth has a weight that cannot be hidden, even from themselves. Guilt wraps around them like a second skin. It changes how they move, how they breathe, how they see the world. Everything reminds them of what they have done. The very air tastes of their disobedience. They find a grove of olive trees where shadows fall thick and dark. Here they crouch like animals hiding from hunters. The leaves above them whisper secrets. The ground beneath them holds the memory of innocence lost. Evening draws closer. Soon the familiar footsteps will echo through the garden. Soon the voice they love will call their names. But love has become complicated now. It carries the possibility of rejection, disappointment, banishment. They wait in their hiding place, clutching their fig leaf garments, tasting shame for the first time. Above them, the tree of knowledge sways in the evening breeze, its work complete. Footsteps in the garden, God returns. The day cools as it always does. Shadows grow long across the garden paths. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves, carrying the scent of jasmine and roses. The time has come for God's evening walk. His footsteps echo softly on the garden floor. Not the heavy tread of anger, but the familiar rhythm of a father coming home. The sound that once brought joy now fills Adam and Eve with terror. They press deeper into their hiding place among the olive trees. God's presence moves through the garden like light through crystal. Birds settle on branches as he passes. Flowers turn their faces toward his approach. The very air seems to brighten around him. This is how it has always been. creation responding to its creator with perfect love. But today something is different. The harmony feels strained, off key. A discord has entered the eternal song. God knows what has happened before he speaks a word. Nothing can be hidden from him, yet still he comes, still he calls. Adam. His voice carries across the garden, gentle but commanding. It is not a shout, but a summons that penetrates every corner of paradise. The name hangs in the air like an echo waiting for response. Adam's heart pounds against his ribs. Beside him, Eve trembles like a leaf in winter wind. They have never hidden from God before. The very idea would have seemed impossible yesterday. Today it feels like their only hope. The footsteps continue. Closer now. God moves through their usual meeting places, the clearing where they shared evening meals, the pool where they watched fish swim in crystal water, the hilltop where they counted stars. Each empty space speaks of what has changed. Where are you? The question floats on the evening air, not spoken in ignorance but in invitation. God knows exactly where they hide. He calls to give them chance to answer, to step forward, to face what they have done. The words pierce through their fear like arrows finding their mark. Where are you? Such a simple question, yet it contains oceans of meaning. Where are you physically? Where are you spiritually? Where are you in relation to me? Adam's throat feels dry as desert sand. The words stick in his mouth like honey turned bitter. How can he answer truthfully? How can he lie to the one who knows all things? The silence stretches between question and response. Eve touches his arm, her fingers cold against his skin. In her eyes, he sees his own panic reflected. They are trapped between truth and falsehood, between honesty and self-preservation. Either path leads to consequences they cannot imagine. Finally, Adam finds his voice. I heard you in the garden. The words come out rough, uncertain. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. Half-truth mixed with confession, admission without full disclosure. The footsteps stop. God's presence settles like morning mist, soft but all-encompassing. He does not come closer, does not force them from their hiding place. Instead, he waits, patient as only eternal love can be patient. Who told you that you were naked? The question cuts to the heart of everything. God's voice remains gentle, but behind the gentleness lies infinite sadness. Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? The moment of reckoning has arrived. No more hiding, no more half-truths. The question hangs in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Adam and Eve crouch in their leafy shelter, knowing that their next words will change everything forever. Around them, the garden holds its breath. Flowers close their petals. Birds fall silent. Even the wind stills to listen. Creation itself waits to hear how its king and queen will answer for their betrayal. The evening light fades slowly, painting the sky in shades of sorrow. Time moves like honey, thick and golden and impossible to hurry. This moment will stretch across history, remembered and retold until the stars burn out. God waits in perfect love and perfect justice. His children hide in perfect fear and perfect shame. Between them lies the chasm opened by a single bite of forbidden fruit. The blame game, man, woman, serpent. Adam emerges first from their leafy shelter. His steps are slow, reluctant, like a condemned man walking to his execution. The fig leaves rustle against his legs as he moves into the evening light where God waits. Eve follows behind, her head bowed, her makeshift garment clutched tight around her shoulders. They stand before their Creator, like children caught in mischief. But this is no small transgression. The weight of their disobedience presses down upon them like stones. God's presence fills the clearing without overwhelming it. He appears as he always has, not in consuming fire or blinding light, but in perfect love made visible. Yet now that love feels dangerous to them, threatening in its purity. The woman you put here with me, Adam begins, his voice shaking. The words tumble out faster now, desperate and defensive. She gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. His finger points toward Eve like an accusation carved in stone. The betrayal cuts deeper than any sword. Adam throws his wife beneath the wheels of divine justice without hesitation. The man who called her bone of his bone now treats her like a stranger, an enemy, a source of contamination. But his blame reaches further still. The woman you put here with me. Hidden in those words lies an even greater accusation. You did this, God. You gave her to me. If you had not created her, none of this would have happened. The fault is yours as much as ours. Eve's head snaps up at his words. Pain flashes across her face like lightning. In one moment, she loses both her husband's protection and her place in paradise. The man who should defend her instead condemns her. The unity they shared shatters completely. God turns his attention to Eve. His gaze is not angry, but infinitely sad, like a father watching beloved children destroy themselves. "What is this you have done?" he asks. The question invites confession, offers one last chance for honesty. "The serpent deceived me," Eve replies, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I ate." She does not point fingers at Adam, does not blame God for creating the serpent. Her words carry truth mixed with excuse, honesty shadowed by self-protection. Yet even she cannot resist shifting some responsibility. "The serpent deceived me. I was tricked, fooled, led astray by another's cunning. The fault is not entirely mine. I am victim as much as perpetrator." The pattern emerges like a disease spreading through a body. Blame flows from person to person, responsibility scattered like seeds in wind. No one accepts full ownership of what they have done. Each points elsewhere, seeks shelter in another's guilt. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. Both implicitly blame God. Adam for creating the woman, Eve for allowing the serpent in the garden. The unity that once bound them together now drives them apart. Love becomes self-preservation. God listens to their excuses without interruption. He does not argue or correct their twisted logic. Instead, he lets their words hang in the air like smoke, revealing the corruption that has entered their hearts along with forbidden knowledge. The serpent, when summoned, offers no defense. It coils silently in the grass, neither admitting guilt nor claiming innocence. Its work is done. The poison has spread from creature to human, infecting the entire relationship between heaven and earth. What began as perfect love has become a tangle of accusation and counter-accusation. Trust has died along with innocence. Fear has replaced faith. The image of God in humanity has cracked like a mirror struck by stone. Standing in the ruins of their former relationship, Adam and Eve no longer look at each other with love. Suspicion clouds their eyes. Resentment builds in their hearts. The other has become a threat, a source of danger, a reminder of shame. God sees it all. The blame shifting, the broken trust, the love turned bitter. His heart breaks for what they have lost, for what they have chosen to become. The children he walked with in perfect fellowship now stand before him as strangers. The garden around them seems to weep. Flowers bow their heads, trees droop their branches, even the stones seem to mourn for the harmony that once reigned here. Paradise has not changed, but its king and queen have fallen from their throne. Justice must come now. Love demands it. But justice will be tempered with mercy, judgment softened by grace. Even in their blame and betrayal, God's love remains constant as the stars. The curse, consequences of the fall. God's voice changes now. Still loving but weighted with sorrow that runs deeper than oceans. The time for questions has passed. The hour of judgment has arrived. Justice must balance the scales that disobedience has tipped. He turns first to the serpent, coiled silent in the grass. "Because you have done this," God's words fall like hammer blows, "cursed are you above all livestock and wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life." The serpent's form begins to shift. Legs that once carried it upright fold inward and disappear. Its spine elongates, curves, presses against the earth. What walked now crawls. What spoke eloquently now hisses through forked tongue. Beauty becomes revulsion in the space of a breath. "I will put enmity between you and the woman," God continues, "between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Promise hides within the curse, hope buried in the depths of judgment. A future deliverer already planned before the first tear falls. Eve trembles as God's attention turns to her. His eyes hold infinite compassion mixed with infinite sadness. "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children." The blessing of creation becomes burden. The joy of bringing life will be shadowed by agony. Every birth will echo this moment of judgment, every labor pain a reminder of paradise lost. Yet still she will bear children, still participate in the ongoing miracle of life. "Your desire will be for your husband," God's voice grows heavier, "and he will rule over you." Harmony becomes hierarchy. Partnership transforms into power struggle. The unity they once shared splinters into dominance and submission, with all the pain such arrangements bring. Adam awaits his turn with growing dread. The curse meant for him carries weight of worlds upon its syllables. Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you. The earth itself bears punishment for human sin. Soil that once yielded easily will fight back with thorns and thistles. Seeds will struggle to grow. Harvests will come through sweat and blood and tears. The ground will grudge every grain of wheat, every blade of grass. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life, God declares. Work becomes labor. Joy transforms into drudgery. The garden that provided freely will give up its treasures only to those who wrestle them from reluctant earth. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food. The curse strikes at the very core of human existence. No more easy abundance. No more fruit falling ripe into waiting hands. Survival will require struggle, effort, constant vigilance against hunger and want. But the deepest cut comes last, until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. Death enters the world like winter entering summer. The bodies that once would have lived forever now carry seeds of their own destruction. Time becomes enemy instead of friend. Each day brings them closer to dissolution. Each breath draws them nearer to their final breath. The tree of life that could have sustained them forever now stands beyond their reach, its fruit forbidden by their own choice. Yet even in judgment, mercy flows like hidden springs. The earth will still yield food, though reluctantly. Children will still be born, though with pain. Life will continue, though shadowed by death. Love will survive, though scarred by conflict. The curse spreads outward from this moment like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Every human who will ever live will feel its weight. Every relationship will bear its scars. Every birth, every death, every day of labor will echo this evening in Eden. Creation itself groans under the burden placed upon it. The perfect order begins to unravel. Disease enters where health once reigned. Conflict replaces cooperation. The very atoms that hold matter together will eventually surrender to entropy and decay. Standing in the ruins of their innocence, Adam and Eve begin to understand the true cost of their choice. They sought wisdom and gained sorrow. They desired knowledge and received grief. The fruit's taste has become ash in their mouths. The garments, mercy and judgment. Something shifts in the air around them. God's voice, heavy with judgment just moments before, carries a different tone now. Not the thunderclap of justice, but the whisper of unexpected grace. Love finds a way even in the depths of consequence. Adam and Eve stand before their Creator, clothed in nothing but shame and poorly woven fig leaves. Their makeshift garments gape and tear, offering little protection from either the elements or their own embarrassment. They shiver despite the evening warmth. Without a word, God begins to move through the garden. His steps are purposeful but unhurried, like a father preparing to care for wounded children. He seeks what he needs among the creatures who still trust him completely. The first lamb comes willingly, following the gentle call of its creator. It shows no fear, no understanding of what its sacrifice will mean. In its innocent eyes shine trust absolute, love uncomplicated by knowledge of good and evil. God's hands are gentle as they end the lamb's life. No violence mars the moment, only profound sadness at necessity born of human choice. The first death in paradise comes not from accident or age, but from mercy's demand for covering. Blood spills onto earth that has never known such staining. The ground drinks it reluctantly, as if understanding that this moment changes everything. What was pure becomes mixed. What was simple grows complex. Death enters Eden through the doorway of grace. Other animals follow, creatures whose lives God takes not in anger but in love. Each death serves the same purpose, providing skins for covering, warmth for protection, dignity for the disgraced. The cost of their clothing will be remembered forever. With infinite care, God prepares the skins. His hands that spoke stars into existence now work like the finest craftsmen, creating garments worthy of those made in his image. Every stitch speaks of love that endures beyond betrayal. The leather is soft as silk, but strong as hope. It fits perfectly, as if measured for each of their bodies before time began. The warmth spreads through their limbs like comfort after long sorrow. For the first time since eating the fruit, they feel truly covered. Come, God says simply. His voice holds no accusation now, only invitation. Adam and Eve approach slowly, their new garments rustling softly in the evening air. They dare not look directly at his face, but feel his attention like sunlight on their skin. He helps them into the garments with his own hands. The God who needs no assistance becomes servant to his fallen children. He adjusts the fit, smooths rough edges, ensures their comfort with the patience of infinite love. The fig leaves fall forgotten to the ground. Their crude coverings become unnecessary in light of divine provision. What they cobbled together in panic, God replaces with excellence. Their shame finds covering in his sacrifice. As he works, God speaks softly of what must come. His words carry sorrow, but also promise. Exile approaches like storm clouds on the horizon, but it will not be exile without hope. Even banishment will be touched by grace. The leather holds warmth from the animals that gave their lives. Each time Adam and Eve wear these garments, they will remember both judgment and mercy, both consequence and care, both the price of sin and the cost of love. When the work is finished, they stand transformed. No longer naked refugees hiding in shadows, but clothed children of a loving Father. The garments speak of their new reality. No longer innocent, but not abandoned. No longer perfect, but still beloved. The animals who gave their lives for this covering represent something profound. In their willing sacrifice lies a pattern, a foreshadowing of greater sacrifice to come. Blood spilled for covering points toward blood that will be spilled for cleansing. Evening deepens around them, but they no longer feel exposed to its chill. Protected by love made visible, covered by mercy made tangible, they begin to understand that even in their exile, they will not walk alone. God steps back to survey his work. The garments are perfect, beautiful in their simplicity, functional in their design. They will wear well, last long, provide protection for the harsh world that awaits beyond Eden's borders. In this moment of clothing, paradise remembers what it means to be home, not because sin has been forgotten, but because love has proven stronger than failure. Grace has found a way to cover what shame exposed. East of Eden, the exile begins. The time has come. No more delays, no more gentle preparation. Paradise must be left behind, its gates closed, its paths forbidden. Adam and Eve stand at the threshold between the world they knew and the world they must now inherit. God's voice carries both authority and ache. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. The tree of life stands in the garden's heart, its fruit still glowing with eternal promise. To eat from it now would lock them into their fallen state forever, immortal but broken, deathless but damaged. Love requires that this door be closed. They walk together toward Eden's eastern border, God beside them like a friend accompanying loved ones to a difficult farewell. Each step takes them further from perfection, closer to the harsh reality of a world under curse. The garden pathway they have walked countless times now feels foreign beneath their feet. Flowers they have smelled, trees they have climbed, streams they have followed, all become memories even as they pass them one final time. Paradise transforms into past tense with each footfall. At the garden's edge, they pause. Beyond the boundary lies wilderness they have never seen, rocky ground, twisted trees, thorny plants that will resist their cultivation. The earth outside Eden has already begun to show the effects of their disobedience. Go, God says gently, not a command born of anger, but a directive born of necessity. They cannot remain where perfection demands what they can no longer give. The garden requires innocence they no longer possess, harmony they can no longer maintain. Adam takes the first step beyond Eden's border. The ground feels different under his leather-wrapped feet, harder, less yielding, reluctant to support his weight. Behind him, Eve follows, her hand reaching back toward the home they are leaving forever. As they cross the threshold, something changes in the air itself. The perfect climate of Eden gives way to the variable weather of the fallen world. Wind carries different scents, dust and struggle, and the promise of storms to come. God remains at the boundary, watching them walk into their uncertain future. His presence feels like a blessing, even in departure, a promise that distance will not equal abandonment. They are leaving his house, but not his heart. Behind them, Eden begins to seal itself. The pathways they knew fade like dreams upon waking. The familiar landmarks shift and blur. The garden prepares to become memory, legend, longing that will haunt every human heart. Light begins to gather at Eden's gates, not the gentle radiance they have always known, but something fierce and protective. Angels appear like flames given form, their swords blazing with divine fire. The way back closes with finality that echoes through eternity. The cherubim take their positions at the entrance, their faces terrible and beautiful, beyond description. Their weapons move like lightning, creating a barrier no human strength can breach. They guard not just a place, but a possibility, the chance to return to innocence lost. Adam and Eve do not look back. Perhaps they cannot bear to see what they have lost. Perhaps they understand that looking backward will only increase their pain. They walk east into the dawn of a new and harsher day. The sun rises differently outside Eden. Its light seems thinner, less nourishing than the illumination they once knew. Shadows fall longer and darker. The very air feels emptier, as if something essential has been removed from the atmosphere of existence. They walk hand in hand now, united again by shared loss, if not by perfect love. The blame and accusation of their judgment day give way to the simple necessity of survival. They need each other in ways they never needed each other before. Behind them, the flaming sword continues its endless dance. Its light can be seen from miles away, a beacon of both warning and promise. No one may enter now, but the sword's existence proves that Eden still remains, waiting for the day when righteousness will unlock its gates once more. The first chapter of human history outside paradise begins with two figures walking east into uncertainty. They carry with them the memory of perfection, the burden of consequence, and the hope buried within God's curse that someday, somehow, the way home will be opened again. Life after Eden, the new world. Their first night beyond Eden passes slowly. Sleep comes in fragments, broken by unfamiliar sounds and uncomfortable realities. The ground beneath them feels hard despite the soft grass they gather for bedding. Their bodies, accustomed to perfect comfort, protest against the imperfections of their new world. Dawn brings their first taste of labor. Hunger gnaws at their stomachs with unfamiliar urgency. In Eden, fruit hung always within reach. Water flowed pure and accessible. Sustenance came without effort. Now they must search, gather, work for every bite. Adam's hands blister as he attempts to break ground for planting. The earth resists his efforts with stubborn resistance. Rocks hidden beneath the surface bloody his knuckles. The soil that should welcome seed instead fights against his crude tools like an enemy refusing surrender. Eve forages among plants she does not recognize, testing carefully for safety. Some berries promise sweetness but deliver bitterness. Others look appealing but leave her mouth burning. Knowledge of good and evil extends even to distinguishing food from poison. Rain comes for the first time in their experience, not the gentle mists that watered Eden, but driving sheets of water that soak through their leather garments and chill their bones. They huddle together under a makeshift shelter, learning what it means to be cold and wet and miserable. The animals they encounter show no recognition, no friendship. Wolves watch them from hillsides with eyes that hold nothing but calculation. Even deer flee at their approach, as if sensing the brokenness that now clings to human form, like invisible smoke. Seasons change around them with harsh swiftness. Summer's heat bakes the ground to concrete hardness. Winter's cold freezes the streams they depend on for water. Spring brings floods that wash away their careful plantings. Autumn offers harvests so meager they face starvation before the cycle begins again. Their bodies age in ways they never expected. Adam's hair begins to show silver threads. Lines appear around Eve's eyes from squinting against sun and wind. Their skin roughens from exposure to weather that paradise never knew. Yet they adapt with surprising resilience. Adam learns to read the sky for weather signs, to judge which plants will grow in rocky soil, to track the movements of seasons through subtle changes in light and shadow. His hands grow calloused but skilled. Eve discovers healing properties in plants that grow wild around their dwelling place. She learns to preserve food for lean times, to weave shelter from available materials, to comfort when comfort seems impossible to find. They speak less than they did in Eden, but communicate in deeper ways. Shared hardship creates understanding that words cannot carry. When Adam's back aches from bending over reluctant earth, Eve's hands know exactly where to knead away the pain. Children begin to grow within Eve's womb, the first humans to be born outside paradise. She carries them with mixture of joy and terror, knowing that the pain of birth will be sharp, but that new life represents hope, continuing despite all loss. Their dwelling grows more sophisticated as seasons pass. What began as crude shelter becomes actual home. They learn to work with wood and stone, to create tools that serve their needs, to build walls that keep out wind and rain and the eyes of watching predators. Memory of Eden fades into something like a dream, not forgotten but transformed into longing rather than clear recollection. They remember the feeling of perfection more than its specific details, the sense of rightness more than the actual form it took. At night, when work is finished, and they lie together listening to unfamiliar sounds in darkness, they sometimes speak of the garden. Their words paint pictures of beauty lost, harmony shattered, innocence that can never be reclaimed. Yet they also speak of tomorrow, of seeds planted that might grow better next season, of children who will carry their knowledge into a future they cannot see, of hope that persists despite evidence that argues against its wisdom. The world outside Eden proves harsh but not hopeless, difficult but not impossible, fallen but not forgotten by the God who still watches over his wandering children, who still provides despite their disobedience, who still loves despite their failure. Cain and Abel, first sons, first blood. Eve's labor pains come with the intensity God promised. She grips Adam's hands until her nails leave marks in his palms. Her cries echo across the valley where they have made their home, frightening birds from their nests and sending small animals fleeing to safer ground. When the first child finally arrives, Eve holds him with trembling hands. "I have brought forth a man with the help of the Lord," she whispers, her voice filled with wonder despite her exhaustion. She names him Cain, acquired, gotten, obtained through divine assistance. The baby's cries pierce the morning air with sounds Eden never knew. This is innocence of a different kind. Not the perfect innocence of paradise, but the blank innocence of new life, waiting to be written upon by experience and choice. Years pass before the second son comes. Abel enters the world more easily, as if Eve's body has learned the rhythm of birth through bitter experience. Two brothers now share the world outside Eden, the first generation born into consequences they did not choose. They grow differently from the start. Cain shows his father's affinity for earth and growing things. His hands seem to understand soil, his eyes read weather patterns. His patience extends to the long seasons between planting and harvest. He inherits Adam's calling to tend the ground. Abel gravitates toward the animals that graze in the valleys around their home. Sheep follow him like he speaks their language. He learns to read their needs, to guide them to good pasture, to protect them from the wolves and lions that hunt in the darkness. The brothers work side by side, but in different worlds. Cain's realm is fixed, rooted, predictable in its cycles. Abel's domain moves with the seasons, flows like water, seeking the best paths across the landscape. Both serve necessary purposes in their family's survival. Time comes when they decide to offer sacrifices to the God who still watches over them despite their exile. Cain brings the fruits of his labor, grain and vegetables grown through sweat and struggle, harvested by hands that know the weight of honest work. Abel selects the finest lamb from his flock, a perfect specimen without blemish or defect. The animal follows him willingly to the altar, trusting as creatures trusted in Eden before blood first stained the earth. They build their altars on a hilltop overlooking the valley where Eden's light still glows in the distance. Each brother arranges his offering with care, seeking to honor the God who provides despite their father's disobedience. Fire from heaven consumes Abel's sacrifice completely. Flames dance over the lamb's body until nothing remains but ash and the sweet smell of acceptance. God's pleasure in the offering manifests in ways that cannot be mistaken or misunderstood. Cain's altar remains cold. No divine fire touches his carefully arranged produce. The grain and fruit sit unchanged, ordinary, seemingly ignored by heaven. The contrast between the two sacrifices could not be more stark or more painful. Anger builds in Cain's chest like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His face darkens with emotions Eden never knew: jealousy, resentment, the bitter taste of perceived injustice. Why should his brother's offering be accepted while his own is rejected? God's voice comes gently, seeking to turn Cain's heart before anger hardens into something worse. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. The warning falls on ears deafened by jealousy. Cain cannot hear wisdom over the roar of his wounded pride. He sees only his brother's success and his own failure, Abel's acceptance and his own rejection. The knowledge of good and evil that poisoned his parents now poisons him. Days pass in brooding silence. Cain watches Abel tend his sheep with growing resentment. Every lamb that follows his brother reminds him of the sacrifice that found favor. Every bleat echoes the divine acceptance he was denied. "Come with me to the field," Cain says to Abel one morning. His voice sounds normal, brotherly, giving no hint of the darkness growing in his heart. Abel agrees readily, always willing to spend time with his older brother. They walk together into the countryside where Cain harvests his crops. The morning is beautiful, sun shining through scattered clouds, birds singing in the hedgerows, gentle breeze carrying the scent of ripening grain. It should be a perfect day for brothers to share. In the middle of the field, far from their parents' home, Cain's rage finally erupts. Words become blows. Dispute becomes violence. The hands that should protect his younger brother instead strike him down. Blood that should flow through veins spills onto the cursed ground. Abel falls among the grain stalks, his life ebbing away like water from a broken vessel. His eyes, wide with shock and betrayal, seek his brother's face for explanation that will never come. The first murder stains the earth with horror Eden never imagined. Cain stands over his brother's body, his anger already cooling into something far worse, the cold realization of what he has done. The silence that follows is deeper than any silence before it. Even the birds stop singing, as if creation itself mourns this new depth of human fallenness. Blood cries from the ground like a voice that will not be silenced. The earth that reluctantly yielded to Adam's cultivation now drinks human blood for the first time. Brother has killed brother. The image of God has been shattered by the hands of those who bear it. In Eden, death came only to animals sacrificed for covering. Now it has found human victims. The curse has borne its most bitter fruit. What began with forbidden knowledge has ripened into forbidden violence. Paradise seems further away than ever before. Eastward drift, Cain's curse. God's voice comes to Cain as he stands in the blood-soaked field, not the gentle call that once summoned Adam in the garden, but the stern inquiry of divine justice confronting human evil. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain's response echoes his father's blame-shifting, but carries deeper rebellion. "I don't know," he lies, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The question drips with defiance, challenging the very foundations of human responsibility. But blood speaks louder than lies. "What have you done?" God's voice carries infinite sorrow. "Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." The earth that grudgingly yielded crops to Cain's labor will now refuse him entirely. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. The farmer becomes nomad, the settled becomes displaced, the rooted becomes rootless. Terror seizes Cain as the weight of his punishment sinks in. "My punishment is more than I can bear," he cries. "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." God's mercy extends even to the murderer. "Not so," he replies. "Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." A mark appears on Cain's forehead, not a scarlet letter of shame, but a sign of divine protection. Even in judgment, love finds a way. Cain gathers what little he can carry and begins his journey eastward. Each step takes him further from the family that raised him, deeper into the wilderness of his own making. The weight of Abel's blood seems to slow his feet like invisible chains. His wandering takes him through landscapes that mirror his inner desolation. Rocky valleys where nothing grows. Desert places where water hides beneath bitter earth. Thornlands that tear at his clothes and flesh with every passage. The external world reflects the wasteland of his soul. Other descendants of Adam and Eve have spread across the earth in the generations since Eden. Cain encounters them with mixture of hope and fear. Will they welcome him? Will they see the mark on his forehead and know what he has done? Some flee at his approach. Others offer cautious hospitality before sending him on his way. None invite him to stay, to settle, to call their place home. The restlessness God placed upon him becomes self-fulfilling prophecy as no community opens its doors to the first murderer. Years pass in endless movement. Cain's feet develop permanent calluses from walking on every kind of terrain. His shoulders grow strong from carrying his possessions from place to place. His eyes learn to read the horizon for the next destination that will never satisfy. Despite his curse, Cain possesses skills that make him useful to the communities he encounters. He knows farming, though the earth no longer responds to his touch. He understands building, organization, the creation of systems that help groups survive and thrive. Gradually, he begins to gather followers, other outcasts, other wanderers, people drawn to his vision of civilization built by human effort rather than divine blessing. They establish the first city, calling it Enoch after Cain's son, who was born during these years of exile. The city represents humanity's attempt to create meaning apart from God. Walls rise to keep out the wilderness. Streets organize chaos into manageable patterns. Laws replace divine command with human agreement. Progress becomes substitute for paradise. Cain's descendants excel in metallurgy, music, livestock management, all the arts that make life more comfortable, more beautiful, more distracted from the questions that haunt quiet moments. They build civilization as monument to human achievement and barrier against divine judgment. Yet the wandering never truly stops. Even in his city, surrounded by walls and followers and the fruits of human ingenuity, Cain remains restless. The blood of Abel still cries from the ground. The mark on his forehead still proclaims his guilt. The east still calls him further from home. His story becomes template for all who choose violence over peace, selfishness over sacrifice, human pride over divine submission. The eastward drift continues through his children and their children, each generation moving further from Eden, both geographically and spiritually. The first city stands as testament to both human creativity and human fallenness. Its walls protect and imprison. Its culture creates and corrupts. Its achievements inspire and isolate. Like its founder, it bears the mark of greatness, shadowed by guilt, of progress haunted by the past it cannot escape. Seth, a second chance. After Abel's blood soaked the ground and Cain wandered into the east, Eve's world felt hollow. The silence stretched like a wound that wouldn't heal. 2 sons born from her body, and now one lay dead while the other walked cursed under heaven's displeasure. But life has a way of pressing forward, even through grief. Adam and Eve came together again, their bodies finding comfort in each other's warmth. Perhaps they whispered prayers in the darkness, or maybe they simply held each other without words. Love persists, even when paradise feels like a distant dream. When Eve felt new life stirring within her, something shifted. Hope crept back into her heart like dawn breaking over a long night. This child would be different. This child carried possibility. The birth came with both pain and wonder, as all births do. When the baby's first cry pierced the air, Eve looked into his tiny face and saw something she hadn't expected. Not a replacement for Abel, not a second chance at Cain, but someone entirely new. Someone who might carry forward what was good and true. She named him Seth, meaning appointed or granted. God had given her another son, another beginning. In that moment, holding this warm bundle of life, Eve felt the Creator's mercy flowing through her tired heart. Seth grew differently than his brothers. Where Cain had been restless and Abel gentle, Seth carried a quiet strength. He watched his parents carefully, learning from their stories, understanding the weight of their history. He knew about the garden they'd lost, the brother who'd been taken, the brother who'd become a wanderer. Adam taught Seth to work the ground, but not with the bitter resignation that had marked his early years outside Eden. Time had softened Adam's anger, and he found joy in showing his son how to coax life from reluctant soil. They worked side by side, their hands moving in rhythm, passing down knowledge that would help humanity survive. Eve shared different wisdom with Seth. She told him about the garden's beauty, about walking with God in the cool evening air. But she also spoke of choices and consequences, of how a single decision could change everything. Her voice carried both warning and love. As Seth matured, people began to notice something special about his family line. They called upon the name of the Lord in ways that felt genuine and deep. Prayer wasn't just asking for things or expressing fear. It became conversation, relationship, a reaching toward the divine that felt natural and right. Seth married and had children of his own. His son Enosh continued this pattern of seeking God, and gradually a family tree grew that stayed connected to heaven. They didn't live in paradise anymore, but they carried paradise in their hearts. This wasn't about perfection. Seth's descendants faced the same struggles as everyone else. They got sick, they argued, they made mistakes. Death still came to their doors. But something ran through their bloodline like a silver thread, a remembrance of what it meant to walk with the Creator. Generations later, people would look back at Seth as the beginning of the righteous line. Through his family would come Noah, who would save humanity from the flood. Through his lineage would eventually come Abraham, who would father nations. The promise of redemption would flow through Seth's children, like a river finding its way to the sea. But Seth himself didn't know about these future glories. He simply lived each day trying to honor the gift he'd been given. He raised his children with stories of the garden and teachings about goodness. He showed them how to work and how to pray, how to love each other, and how to remember their Creator. In the evenings, when the family gathered around their fire, Seth would sometimes catch his parents looking at him with wonder. They saw in him proof that their story wasn't just about loss. Yes, they'd been exiled from paradise. Yes, they'd watched their first children struggle with violence and jealousy. But here was Seth, alive and thriving, carrying forward the best of what they'd learned. The name Seth echoed with hope. In Hebrew, it sounded like a gift freely given, a second chance offered by gentle hands. Eve had lost Abel's innocence and Cain's potential, but she'd gained something else through Seth, the knowledge that God's mercy was larger than her mistakes. Through Seth, the story of humanity took a different turn. Not back to Eden, that door remained closed, but forward toward something new, something that honored both the paradise that was lost and the hope that remained. In Seth's quiet faithfulness, the seeds of redemption took root and began to grow. Angels at the gate, myths of the Watchers. Beyond Eden's sealed entrance, where flaming swords turned in the hands of cherubim, strange stories began to take shape. As humanity scattered across the earth, whispers spread about beings who had once watched from heaven but chose to descend and walk among mortals. These tales grew in the telling, passed from father to son around evening fires, embellished by dreamers and prophets. The stories spoke of angels who had gazed down from their celestial heights and felt something they weren't supposed to feel: desire for the daughters of men. In the earliest versions, these beings were called Watchers, appointed by the Most High to observe and report on human affairs. They stood at the boundaries between heaven and earth, neither fully divine nor mortal, tasked with keeping watch over the unfolding drama below. But watching became wanting. Some of these heavenly beings saw the beauty of human women and felt their hearts stir with longing. They witnessed the tender moments between husband and wife, the joy of parents holding newborn children, the simple pleasures of mortal love. And something within their immortal nature rebelled against the distance of their calling. The Book of Enoch, ancient and mysterious, tells their story in vivid detail. 200 angels, led by one called Semjaza, made a pact among themselves. They would descend to earth, take human wives, and taste the sweetness of mortal experience. They swore an oath together, binding themselves to this cosmic rebellion, knowing they could not turn back once they crossed that line. Their descent changed everything. When these divine beings took human form and mated with earthly women, their offspring were unlike anything seen before. The children grew to enormous size, possessing strength that could move mountains and appetites that could devour entire harvests. These were the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the giants who walked the earth in those days. But the fallen angels brought more than just physical changes. They carried with them knowledge that humans weren't meant to possess. They taught the arts of war, showing men how to forge weapons of bronze and iron. They revealed the secrets of cosmetics and jewelry, teaching women to enhance their beauty. They shared the mysteries of astrology and divination, opening doors to spiritual realms that mortals had never explored. One angel taught the making of shields and breastplates. Another revealed the cutting of roots and the power of plants. They showed humans how to observe the stars and read omens in their movements. The knowledge flowed like water breaking through a dam, flooding human consciousness with information that transformed their world. At first, these gifts seemed wonderful. Humans gained power over their environment in ways they'd never imagined. They could fight more effectively, heal more diseases, predict changes in weather and season. But with this knowledge came consequences that the angels hadn't foreseen. Violence spread across the earth like a plague. The weapons they'd taught humans to make were turned not just against wild beasts, but against each other. Wars broke out as tribes sought to dominate their neighbors. The giants born from angelic unions consumed resources so rapidly that ordinary humans began to starve. The earth itself began to cry out under the weight of this corruption. The natural order, already strained by humanity's exile from Eden, buckled under the pressure of supernatural interference. What had been meant as gifts became curses, and what had been intended as elevation became degradation. In heaven, the remaining angels watched with growing alarm. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel approached the throne of the Most High with urgent reports. The earth was becoming a place of chaos and violence. The bloodshed was spreading. Something had to be done. The judgment came swift and terrible. The fallen angels were bound with chains and cast into dark places beneath the earth, there to await final punishment. Their giant offspring were set against each other in wars that would destroy them. The knowledge they had shared would remain, but it would come with suffering that would make humans think twice before reaching too eagerly for forbidden wisdom. The flood of Noah's time was, in part, a response to this cosmic disaster. The earth needed washing, cleansing from the corruption that had seeped into its very foundations. The Watchers had tried to bridge heaven and earth through desire and rebellion, but their attempt had only created greater separation. Yet the stories of the Watchers lived on, echoing through different cultures and traditions. Greek myths spoke of titans who challenged the gods. Indian legends told of divine beings who took human form. Norse tales described giants born from the union of gods and mortals. These weren't just coincidental similarities. They were memories of something that had actually happened, preserved in the collective imagination of humanity. The angels at Eden's gate had been faithful guardians, keeping watch over the path back to paradise. But their fallen brothers had chosen a different path, one that led not to restoration, but to greater exile. Their story became a warning about the dangers of crossing boundaries that were meant to protect rather than restrict. In the end, the myth of the Watchers revealed something important about the nature of desire and wisdom. The angels had possessed great knowledge and power, but their longing for human experience had corrupted both. They had sought to give gifts to humanity, but their gifts had come from rebellion rather than love, and so they brought curse rather than blessing. The true path back to paradise would not come through stolen knowledge or forbidden unions. It would require a different kind of bridge between heaven and earth, one built not on desire and rebellion, but on sacrifice and obedience. The Watcher's failure pointed toward the need for a different kind of mediator, one who could unite divine and human nature without corrupting either. The Garden Lost, Geography and Legend. Where was Eden? This question has haunted human imagination for thousands of years, driving explorers to the ends of the earth and scholars to the depths of ancient texts. The Bible gives us clues, but they feel like pieces of a puzzle scattered by time and catastrophe. Genesis tells us that a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 streams. 2 of these we can still identify today, the Tigris and Euphrates, great rivers that flow through modern Iraq. But the other 2, the Pishon and Gihon, have vanished from maps and memory. Most scholars point toward Mesopotamia, that fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates where civilization first bloomed. Here, in what is now Iraq, the earliest cities rose from the mud. Here, writing was invented, laws were coded, and empires were born. If Eden existed on Earth, this seems the most likely place. but the geography doesn't quite match what Genesis describes. The rivers have changed their courses over millennia, floods have shifted the landscape, wars have obliterated ancient landmarks. If Eden was here, it lies buried beneath layers of silt and history, perhaps lost forever beneath the Persian Gulf's waters. Some have suggested different locations entirely. Armenia, with its high mountains and flowing rivers, has been proposed as the source of Eden's streams. The region fits the biblical description in some ways, and local traditions have long claimed this connection. Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark is said to have landed, rises like a monument to humanity's second beginning. Others have looked to Africa, noting that Genesis speaks of gold and precious stones near Eden's borders. The ancient kingdom of Cush is mentioned, and some believe this points toward Ethiopia or Sudan. The Blue Nile and White Nile could be the mysterious Pishon and Gihon, flowing down from African highlands to water the desert. Still others have proposed more exotic locations. Some medieval maps placed Eden in the Far East, beyond the known world. Chinese legends speak of a western paradise where immortals dwelled among flowering trees. Persian texts describe a garden where the first humans lived in harmony with nature and divine beings. The search for physical Eden has led to fascinating discoveries, even if the garden itself remains elusive. Archaeologists have found evidence of sophisticated civilizations that flourished in precisely the regions where Eden might have been located. The Sumerians told stories remarkably similar to those in Genesis, speaking of a golden age when gods walked among humans. At Tel Es Sawan in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered remains of one of the world's earliest farming communities. Here, around 6000 BCE, people were already irrigating crops and domesticating animals. They created beautiful pottery, decorated with flowing designs that seem to echo the rivers of paradise. Could this be where Adam first learned to till the ground? The ancient city of Eridu, also in Iraq, was considered by the Sumerians to be the first city ever built. They believed it was founded by the gods themselves, a bridge between heaven and earth. Its ruins lie in the desert now, but once it was surrounded by marshes and canals, a green oasis in an otherwise harsh landscape. But perhaps we're looking for Eden in the wrong way entirely. Some scholars suggest that the garden was never meant to be found on any earthly map. The four rivers might represent the four cardinal directions, suggesting that Eden encompassed the entire known world. The garden wasn't a place but a state of being, a way of existing in harmony with creation. This interpretation gains weight when we consider how the story of Eden appears in other cultures. Almost every ancient civilization has tales of a golden age, a time when humans lived in paradise and communed directly with the divine. These stories share remarkable similarities despite arising in completely different parts of the world. The Greeks spoke of the Golden Age when humans lived without labor or sorrow under the gentle rule of Kronos. The Hindus describe Satya Yuga, a perfect era when Dharma ruled and suffering was unknown. The Chinese tell of the age of perfect virtue when people lived simply and in harmony with the Tao. Are these separate myths or memories of the same original truth? Some suggest that the story of Eden represents humanity's collective memory of its prehistoric past, a time before the development of agriculture and civilization brought both progress and problems. Archaeological evidence shows that early hunter-gatherers often lived longer, healthier lives than their farming descendants. The search for Eden has also been influenced by changing ideas about what paradise should look like. Medieval maps often showed Eden as a walled garden in the east, complete with the tree of life and guarded by angels. Renaissance artists painted it as an Italian countryside, with rolling hills and classical architecture. More recently, some have suggested that Eden might be found not by looking backward, but forward. Perhaps the garden represents not our past, but our destiny, a state of harmony between humanity and nature that we're meant to achieve through wisdom and spiritual growth. In this view, every garden we plant, every wilderness we preserve, every moment of peace we create brings us closer to Eden. The physical search continues, driven by both scholarly curiosity and spiritual longing. Satellite imaging has revealed lost rivers and buried cities throughout the Middle East. Ground-penetrating radar has uncovered ancient irrigation systems that might date back to humanity's earliest attempts at agriculture. But perhaps the most important discovery is this: Eden lives not in any particular place, but in the human heart. It represents our deepest longing for harmony, for a world where love rules over fear, where abundance replaces scarcity, where the divine and human meet without shame or separation. The rivers of Eden may have changed their courses or dried up entirely. The trees may have withered, the walls crumbled, the very ground itself transformed beyond recognition. But the garden remains alive in our dreams and stories, calling us towards something better than what we've lost, something more beautiful than what we've known. Every sunset that takes our breath away, every garden that feeds our bodies and souls, every moment when we feel connected to something larger than ourselves, these are glimpses of Eden. Reminders that paradise is not just a memory, but a promise, not just a place we once knew, but a destination we're still traveling toward. Eden in other cultures, echoes in myth across the ancient world, separated by oceans and centuries, cultures told remarkably similar stories. A garden of perfection, a golden age of harmony, the loss of innocence through a single fateful choice. These tales arose independently, yet they share threads that weave together into a pattern too consistent to ignore. In ancient Mesopotamia, long before Genesis was written, the Sumerians spoke of Dilmun, a pure and bright land where illness and death were unknown. Here the gods lived in peace, and the lion lay down with the lamb. Fresh water flowed abundantly, and the earth produced its bounty without human labor. But this paradise was lost when divine beings broke cosmic laws, bringing suffering into the world. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, tells of Enkidu, a wild man who lived in harmony with animals until a woman brought him knowledge that separated him from his natural state. After eating the bread of civilization and drinking its beer, he could no longer communicate with the beasts. His innocence was gone, replaced by wisdom that carried the weight of mortality. Babylonian texts describe the Apkallu, seven wise beings who brought knowledge to early humanity. But their teachings, while beneficial, also marked the end of a simpler age. Like the fruit of the tree of knowledge, their gifts came with unexpected consequences, transforming human society in ways both wonderful and terrible. In ancient Persia, the Avesta speaks of Aryana Veja, the first and best creation of Ahura Mazda. This perfect realm was a place of eternal spring where death and disease were unknown. But Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, invaded this paradise and brought winter, want, and suffering. The inhabitants were forced to leave their perfect home and spread across the earth. The Greek tradition preserves memories of the golden age under Kronos, when humans lived like gods, free from toil and grief. The earth produced food without cultivation, honey dripped from oak trees, and rivers flowed with wine and milk. But this age ended when Zeus overthrew his father, and humanity descended through Silver and Bronze Ages to the current Iron Age of struggle and sorrow. Hesiod's myth of Pandora echoes the Eden story in striking ways. The first woman, created by the gods as both gift and punishment, opens a jar that releases all evils into the world. Her curiosity, like Eve's, transforms human existence forever. Only hope remains trapped inside, a reminder that redemption might still be possible. In Hindu tradition, the concept of Satyuga describes a perfect age when Dharma walked on four legs instead of the single leg it limps on today. Humans lived for thousands of years, their bodies tall and strong, their minds clear and peaceful. They communed directly with the divine and needed no temples or rituals. But cosmic time moves in cycles, and this golden age gave way to increasing darkness and confusion. The Puranas tell of sage Bharadvaja, who lived in a perfect garden where wish-fulfilling trees granted every desire. But even in paradise, the sage felt incomplete until he learned the deeper wisdom that comes only through experience of loss and longing. His voluntary exile from this perfect realm led to greater understanding. Chinese mythology speaks of the garden of the Queen Mother of the West, where peach trees bore fruit that granted immortality. This paradise existed beyond the Western Mountains, populated by beings who lived in perfect harmony. But mortals who sought to enter this realm found it always receding, like a mirage that appears close but remains forever distant. The Taoist concept of the age of perfect virtue describes a time when people lived simply and naturally, following the Tao without effort or striving. They knew nothing of good and evil as separate concepts, for they lived in harmony with the natural order. But the introduction of moral knowledge and social complexity ended this golden age. Norse mythology tells of Idavol, the plain where the gods played chess with golden pieces before the world knew sorrow. This was a time of peace and plenty, but it ended when the first murder brought violence into creation. The gods' own conflicts reflected humanity's fall from innocence. In Celtic lore, the otherworld appears as an island paradise where apple trees bear fruit that grants eternal youth. Time moves differently there, and sorrow is unknown. But mortals who visit this realm often find themselves changed by the experience, unable to return to their former innocence, even when they come back to the mortal world. African traditions preserve stories of a time when humans and animals spoke the same language and lived together in peace. The sky god walked among people, and the earth provided everything needed for life. But human disobedience or carelessness broke this connection, forcing the divine to withdraw and leaving humanity to struggle alone. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories speak of the rainbow serpent creating a perfect landscape where all beings lived in harmony. But conflict arose when some creatures broke the sacred laws, disrupting the natural balance and creating the harsh realities that characterize life in the physical world. Aztec mythology tells of the four suns, previous worlds that were destroyed when their inhabitants failed to maintain proper relationships with the gods. Each world was a kind of paradise that ended in catastrophe, leading to the current fifth sun, under which humanity now lives in constant awareness of its own mortality. These stories, emerging from cultures that had no contact with each other, suggest something profound about human experience. Perhaps they are collective memories of an actual historical period when life was easier and more harmonious. Perhaps they reflect humanity's deep psychological need to believe in a golden age that gives meaning to current struggles. Or perhaps they point to something even more fundamental, a spiritual truth encoded in the human heart. The universal longing for paradise might be the soul's memory of its divine origin, a homesickness for a state of being that transcends ordinary consciousness. What's remarkable is how these various traditions often include similar elements: a tree or plant of knowledge, a forbidden act that brings consciousness of good and evil, the loss of direct communion with the divine, and the introduction of death and suffering into human experience. These parallels suggest that the Eden story touches on themes that are truly universal. The myths also share a common thread of hope. Even though paradise is lost, it remains somehow accessible through wisdom, virtue, or divine grace. The way back may be difficult, but it exists. The garden may be closed, but its memory continues to guide humanity towards something better. Theology of the fall, sin, free will, and originality. The story of Eden's loss has sparked theological debate for thousands of years. What exactly happened in that garden? What does it mean for humanity today? Different traditions have wrestled with these questions, each finding different answers that shape how their followers understand human nature and divine purpose. Jewish interpretation tends to focus less on inherited sin and more on the continuing capacity for choice. In Hebrew thought, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, exists along the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination. Adam and Eve's choice showed that humans possess the dangerous gift of moral freedom. They can choose to follow divine command or to pursue their own path. The Talmudic sages saw the fall not as cosmic catastrophe, but as the necessary beginning of human moral development. Before eating from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve were like children, innocent but not truly good, since they had never been tested. The choice to disobey brought them into the realm of moral responsibility where true righteousness becomes possible. Some Jewish mystical traditions suggest that the fall was actually part of the divine plan. The Zohar speaks of souls that needed to descend into physical existence to achieve their ultimate purpose. The exile from Eden wasn't punishment, but graduation, a movement from simple obedience to the complex work of repairing the world through conscious choice. Christian theology has traditionally viewed the fall more dramatically. Paul's letters describe Adam's sin as bringing death and corruption into all creation. This doctrine of original sin suggests that every human born after Adam inherits a fundamental flaw, a separation from God that cannot be healed through human effort alone. Augustine developed this thinking further, arguing that Adam's sin created such damage to human nature that we are born unable to choose good without divine grace. The will itself is corrupted, making every person guilty before God from birth. Only Christ's sacrifice can restore what was lost in Eden. But Eastern Orthodox Christianity takes a gentler approach. While they acknowledge that Adam's sin affected all humanity, they emphasize the image of God that remains intact in every person. Humans are wounded by the fall, but not fundamentally corrupted. Theosis, the process of becoming like God, remains possible through cooperation with divine grace. Protestant reformers like Luther and Calvin emphasized the complete depravity that resulted from Eden's loss. They taught that humans are so affected by sin that they cannot even desire salvation without God's direct intervention. Every human achievement is tainted by selfish motivation, every good deed mixed with prideful corruption. More recent Protestant thinking has sometimes moved toward a middle ground. Some evangelicals speak of humans as created with dignity, but affected by sin in ways that make divine help necessary, but don't eliminate human responsibility. The fall damaged human nature, but didn't destroy the capacity for relationship with God. Catholic teaching has traditionally balanced human responsibility with divine grace. The Catechism describes original sin as a real condition inherited from Adam, but distinguishes it from personal sin. Humans are born with a tendency towards sin, but retain the capacity to choose good, especially with the help of grace received through the sacraments. Liberation theologians have sometimes reinterpreted the fall in social and political terms. They see Eden's loss as representing the human choice for systems of oppression over divine justice. Sin becomes not just individual moral failure, but participation in structures that harm the poor and marginalized. Feminist theologians have often challenged traditional interpretations that place special blame on Eve. Some argue that the story reflects ancient patriarchal assumptions rather than divine truth. Others reread the narrative to emphasize Eve's courage in seeking knowledge and growth, seeing her choice as necessary for human development. Islamic tradition presents its own perspective on humanity's first disobedience. While acknowledging that Adam and Hawa, Eve, disobeyed Allah's command, Islam doesn't develop a doctrine of original sin. Each person is born in a state of fitra, natural purity, and is responsible only for their own choices. The Quran describes Adam's repentance and Allah's forgiveness, emphasizing that the mistake in paradise didn't create permanent separation between humanity and the divine. Humans are born with the capacity for both good and evil, and their eternal destiny depends on their own actions and Allah's mercy. Philosophical questions about free will have always complicated theological discussions of the fall. If God is all-knowing, did he know that Adam and Eve would disobey? If so, why did he create them with the capacity for sin? If humans are truly free to choose, how can God be sovereign over all events? Some theologians have argued for compatibilist positions that try to preserve both divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Others have embraced mystery, acknowledging that the relationship between divine foreknowledge and human freedom may be beyond human understanding. The doctrine of original sin raises difficult questions about divine justice. Is it fair for all humanity to suffer because of Adam's choice? How can a loving God condemn people for a corruption they inherited rather than chose? Different traditions have struggled with these questions in different ways. Process theologians have sometimes suggested that God's knowledge and power are limited in ways that make genuine human freedom possible. In this view, the fall represents a real risk that God took in creating beings capable of love, since love requires the freedom to choose its opposite. Reformed theologians have often emphasized God's glory even in the fall, arguing that the display of justice in condemning sin and mercy in providing salvation reveals divine attributes that could not have been known otherwise. The fall becomes part of a larger plan that ultimately brings more glory to God than an unfallen world could have done. Modern psychology has added new dimensions to these ancient debates. Some see in the Eden story a symbolic representation of the human development from unconscious innocence to self-aware consciousness. The fall becomes a necessary stage in psychological maturation rather than moral failure. Evolutionary biology has raised questions about how these theological concepts relate to humanity's actual development. If humans evolved from earlier species, when did the fall occur? Some theologians have suggested that the story represents a spiritual rather than historical truth about the human condition. The debate continues to evolve as new perspectives emerge. What remains constant is the recognition that the Eden story touches on fundamental questions about human nature, moral responsibility, and the relationship between creatures and their creator. Whether viewed as historical event, spiritual symbol, or psychological metaphor, the fall continues to shape how humans understand themselves and their place in the cosmic order. Art of Eden, painting, sculpture, and poetry. Throughout history, artists have been drawn to Eden like moths to flame. The garden's story offers everything that great art requires: beauty and tragedy, innocence and knowledge, divine mystery and human frailty. From medieval manuscripts to modern galleries, creators have found endless inspiration in Paradise Lost. The earliest Christian art treated Eden with reverence and restraint. Byzantine mosaics showed Adam and Eve as noble figures, their bodies simplified and symbolic rather than realistic. These artists weren't interested in sensual beauty, but in spiritual truth. The garden appeared as a sacred space filled with stylized trees and decorative birds, more like a heavenly vision than an earthly place. Medieval illuminated manuscripts brought Eden to life with intricate detail and vibrant color. The Très Riche du Duc de Berry shows the garden as a walled paradise, with Adam and Eve moving through scenes that blend biblical narrative with contemporary castle architecture. These artists imagined Eden as the ultimate aristocratic estate, complete with elaborate gardens and exotic animals. Gothic cathedrals incorporated Eden into their stone narratives, carving the story into portals and capitals, where illiterate worshippers could read humanity's history in sculptured form. At Chartres Cathedral, the creation of Eve emerges from Adam's side with delicate grace, while their expulsion shows raw emotion in flowing drapery and expressive faces. The Renaissance brought revolutionary changes to Eden's artistic treatment. Artists like Masaccio began painting Adam and Eve with unprecedented psychological depth. His fresco in the Brancacci Chapel shows the expelled couple with faces contorted by genuine grief. Their naked bodies no longer symbols, but vulnerable human forms experiencing real shame and loss. Leonardo da Vinci's sketches explored the garden's scientific possibilities. His anatomical studies informed his vision of perfect human form, while his botanical drawings imagined what Eden's plants might have looked like. For Leonardo, paradise represented the harmony between art and nature that he spent his life trying to achieve. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling presented Eden on the grandest possible scale. His Adam receives life with languid grace, fingertip almost touching gods in the most famous image in Western art. The fall and expulsion that follow show humanity's tragedy in muscular, dynamic forms that make divine judgment feel both inevitable and heartbreaking. Hieronymus Bosch created the most fantastical vision of Eden in his Garden of Earthly Delights. His central panel shows a world of surreal abundance where humans cavort with exotic animals in landscapes that blend the familiar with the impossible. Whether depicting paradise or its corruption remains a matter of debate, but Bosch's garden captures something essential about human desire and its consequences. Dürer's engravings brought Germanic precision to Eden's story. His Adam and Eve stand in a northern European forest rather than a Mediterranean garden, surrounded by animals that represent the four temperaments. Every leaf and hair receives meticulous attention, creating images that feel both mythic and immediately real. Peter Paul Rubens painted Eden with characteristic exuberance, his Eve voluptuous and glowing, his Adam heroically proportioned. Rubens' garden overflows with life, parrots and peacocks, lions and lambs, fruit hanging heavy on abundant branches. His paradise celebrates physical beauty and natural abundance with joy that makes the coming loss even more poignant. John Milton's Paradise Lost gave Eden its most influential literary treatment. His blank verse carries readers through landscapes of impossible beauty, populated by characters who speak with the dignity of classical heroes. Milton's garden breathes with personified nature, where every flower and stream participates in the cosmic drama of choice and consequence. Milton's Eve emerges as a complex character, neither temptress nor victim, but a being capable of both wisdom and error. His Adam struggles with loyalty and desire, making choices that feel psychologically authentic. The poem's Eden becomes a place where readers can imagine themselves living, loving, and ultimately failing. William Blake illustrated Milton's vision with engravings that transform biblical narrative into psychological allegory. Blake's Adam and Eve exist in states of consciousness rather than physical places, their story representing every human's journey from innocence through experience toward higher understanding. His garden images pulse with symbolic energy that makes the spiritual visible. Romantic painters like Thomas Cole found in Eden a subject that matched their interest in sublime landscape. Cole's expulsion from the Garden of Eden contrasts the gentle abundance of paradise with the wild, storm-torn landscape into which humanity must venture. The painting captures the emotional impact of losing paradise while suggesting that wilderness contains its own terrible beauty. Pre-Raphaelite artists brought new sensuality to Eden's imagery. Their paintings emphasize the garden's erotic dimensions, showing Adam and Eve as lovers discovering both passion and shame. These works reflected Victorian anxieties about sexuality while celebrating physical beauty with unprecedented frankness. Modern artists have found fresh approaches to ancient themes. Salvador Dali's surrealist Eden fragments the story into dreamlike images where melting clocks and impossible architectures suggest that paradise exists outside normal time and space. His Adam and Eve merge with landscape in ways that make them seem more elemental than human. Marc Chagall's paintings bring Jewish folk tradition to Eden's story, showing the garden through the lens of Eastern European shtetl life. His floating figures and vibrant colors transform biblical narrative into celebration of love and community that transcends specific religious boundaries. Contemporary artists continue finding new meanings in Eden's imagery. Some explore environmental themes, seeing in the garden story a warning about humanity's relationship with nature. Others focus on gender dynamics, reinterpreting Eve's role in ways that challenge traditional assumptions about women and knowledge. Sculptors have faced unique challenges in depicting Eden. How do you carve paradise from stone or mold it from clay? Auguste Rodin's Gates of Hell includes panels showing the expulsion, but his figures seem more trapped by psychological torment than divine punishment. His Adam emerges from rough stone as if struggling to be born from the earth itself. Photography has brought new possibilities to Eden's artistic treatment. Some photographers create constructed tableaux that reimagine the garden with contemporary models and settings. Others find Eden-like moments in natural landscapes, suggesting that paradise might be glimpsed in the world around us if we learn to see with the right eyes. Digital artists now create virtual Edens that viewers can enter and explore. These interactive paradises raise new questions about the nature of perfect worlds and humanity's relationship with technology. Some suggest that virtual reality might offer the closest thing to paradise that humans can actually experience. The continuing artistic fascination with Eden reveals something profound about the story's enduring power. Artists return to the garden not just because it offers dramatic subject matter, but because it addresses fundamental questions about beauty, knowledge, and loss that every generation must answer anew. In every artistic medium, Eden becomes a mirror reflecting human hopes and fears. The garden we paint or sculpt or describe reveals as much about ourselves as about the original paradise. Through art, we continue the work that Adam began in naming the animals. We give form to our deepest longings and our most troubling questions, creating beauty from the fragments of what we've lost. Feminist readings. Eve Re-examined. For centuries, Eve carried the weight of humanity's fall on her shoulders. Traditional interpretations painted her as the weaker vessel, the one who succumbed to temptation and led her husband astray. But modern feminist scholars have begun reading her story with fresh eyes, finding in Eve not weakness but courage, not foolishness but wisdom. The traditional view, shaped by centuries of male interpretation, saw Eve as secondary to Adam in both creation and importance. She was made from his rib, created as helper and companion, naturally more susceptible to deception. Church fathers from Augustine to Aquinas reinforce this reading, seeing in Eve's choice the explanation for women's supposed moral weakness and intellectual inferiority. But feminist theologians began questioning these assumptions in the 20th century. They noticed that the Hebrew word ezer, translated as helper, appears elsewhere in Scripture to describe God's relationship to humanity. Far from suggesting inferiority, it implies strength and support. Eve wasn't Adam's subordinate, but his equal partner in the work of living. Some scholars point out that Eve shows more curiosity and initiative than Adam in the garden. She engages with the serpent in philosophical dialogue, asking questions and thinking through consequences. When she sees that the fruit is good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she makes a reasoned decision rather than acting from pure impulse. Adam, by contrast, seems passive in most retellings. He receives the fruit from Eve without question or discussion. Some feminist interpreters suggest that his silence during the temptation scene implies consent or even cowardice. He was present, according to the Hebrew text, yet offered no protection or guidance to his wife. The punishment that follows reveals interesting dynamics. God addresses Adam directly about his disobedience, holding him responsible for listening to his wife rather than to divine command. This suggests that Adam bore equal or greater responsibility for the fall, contradicting traditional interpretations that blamed Eve primarily. Modern feminist readings often celebrate Eve's choice as humanity's first act of liberation. Instead of remaining in childlike obedience, she chose knowledge and growth, even at great cost. Her decision opened the path to human development, moral consciousness, and eventual spiritual maturity. Without her courage, humanity might have remained forever in a state of innocent ignorance. Some see in Eve's story a metaphor for women's historical struggle for education and autonomy. Just as Eve reached for forbidden knowledge, women throughout history have fought for access to learning that patriarchal societies denied them. The punishment that followed, pain in childbearing, subordination to husbands, reflects social conditions imposed by male-dominated cultures rather than divine decree. Womanist theologians, bringing African American women's perspectives to biblical interpretation, find in Eve a figure of resistance against oppressive systems. Her willingness to challenge authority resonates with women who have fought against slavery, discrimination, and marginalization. Eve becomes a model of the courage needed to speak truth to power. Jewish feminist scholar Phyllis Tribble has argued that the Eden story originally portrayed gender equality that was later obscured by patriarchal interpretation. She notes that both Adam and Eve are created in God's image, both receive the same commands, and both face the same consequences for their choices. The hierarchy that emerges after the fall represents human brokenness rather than divine design. Some feminist theologians go further, suggesting that the serpent represents feminine wisdom that patriarchal religion sought to suppress. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, serpents were often associated with goddess figures and feminine power. The Eden story might preserve echoes of religious conflicts where male sky gods defeated older earth goddess traditions. Psychologist Carol Gilligan's work on moral development has influenced feminist readings of Eve's choice. Gilligan argues that women often approach ethical decisions differently than men, emphasizing relationships and care rather than abstract rules. From this perspective, Eve's consideration of the fruit's multiple benefits reflects a complex moral reasoning that traditional interpretations dismissed as weakness. Artist and writer Judy Chicago created visual interpretations of Eve that reclaim her story for feminist purposes. Her birth project and other works show Eve as creative force rather than destructive temptress, emphasizing women's power to bring new life and consciousness into the world. Contemporary feminist biblical scholars like Tikva Frymer-Kensky have explored how ancient Hebrew culture's attitudes toward women influenced the Eden story's transmission. They note that early Jewish interpretations were often more egalitarian than later Christian readings that emphasized female subordination. Some feminist theologians have re-examined the relationship between sexuality and sin in traditional interpretations of Eden. They argue that the shame Adam and Eve feel after eating the fruit has been wrongly associated with sexual knowledge specifically. Instead, their awareness represents a broader consciousness of vulnerability and mortality that affects all aspects of human existence. Liberation theologian Rosemary Radford Ruther sees in Eve's story a pattern that repeats throughout scripture and history. Women who challenge existing power structures are labeled as dangerous or evil, while their contributions to human progress are minimized or ignored. Eve becomes the first in a long line of women whose wisdom was feared rather than celebrated. Some feminist interpretations focus on Eve as the first mother, emphasizing her role in continuing human life outside paradise. When she gives birth to Cain, she declares that she has created a man with the help of the Lord. This statement shows her understanding of her partnership with divine creativity in bringing forth new generations. The naming of Eve also receives feminist attention. Adam calls her the mother of all living after the fall, recognizing her essential role in humanity's future. Some scholars see this as a moment of appreciation and honor, rather than mere biological designation. Environmental feminists have connected Eve's story to humanity's relationship with nature. They argue that the domination of women and the exploitation of the earth stem from the same patriarchal mindset that fears and seeks to control feminine power. Eve's punishment includes tension with the earth that will no longer yield its bounty easily, suggesting that healing human relationships requires healing our connection to the natural world. Contemporary women writers continue finding new meanings in Eve's story. Poets like Anne Sexton and Lucille Clifton have written verses that reclaim Eve as hero rather than villain. Novelists like Anita Diamant and Naomi Alderman have retold the story from Eve's perspective, imagining her thoughts and feelings during the crucial moments of choice and consequence. These feminist rereadings don't necessarily reject the spiritual significance of the Eden story, but they insist that its meaning can't be fully understood without considering women's perspectives and experiences. They suggest that Eve's story has been filtered through centuries of male interpretation that reflected the prejudices and assumptions of patriarchal societies rather than the text's original intent. The continuing evolution of feminist biblical interpretation shows how ancient stories can yield new insights when approached with fresh questions and perspectives. Eve's story remains powerful not because it confirms traditional gender roles, but because it explores universal themes of knowledge, choice, consequence, and growth that speak to human experience across all boundaries of gender, culture, and time. By reclaiming Eve as a complex, thoughtful character rather than a simple temptress, feminist interpreters have enriched our understanding of the Eden story. They've shown how the narrative speaks to women's experiences of seeking knowledge, making difficult choices, and facing the consequences of challenging existing authorities. Gnostics and mystics, secret Edens. Behind the familiar story of Eden lies a hidden world of secret interpretations and mystical meanings. Throughout history, esoteric traditions have seen in the garden tale not simple moral instruction, but encoded wisdom about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the human soul's journey toward divine understanding. Gnostic Christians in the early centuries after Christ developed radically different readings of the Eden story. Where Orthodox Christianity saw the fall as humanity's tragic disobedience, Gnostics often portrayed it as the first step towards spiritual awakening. In their view, the God who forbade eating from the tree of knowledge was not the true divine source, but a lesser deity seeking to keep humans ignorant and enslaved. The serpent, vilified in traditional interpretations, became in Gnostic thought a liberating figure, bringing divine wisdom to imprisoned souls. Some Gnostic texts identify the serpent with Christ himself, both bringing knowledge that frees humanity from ignorance. The fruit of knowledge represented gnosis, direct spiritual insight that allows souls to remember their divine origin. In the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, paradise exists not as a physical place, but as a state of consciousness. Those who achieve gnosis can return to this paradise even while living in the material world. The garden becomes a metaphor for the enlightened mind that sees through the illusions of ordinary reality to perceive the divine light within all things. The Apocryphon of John, a central Gnostic text, describes Adam's creation by inferior divine beings called archons. These entities sought to trap divine sparks in material bodies, keeping souls ignorant of their true nature. The eating of forbidden fruit awakened Adam and Eve to their spiritual heritage, beginning their journey back to the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. Gnostic interpretations often reversed traditional gender roles in the Eden story. Some texts present Eve as the more spiritually advanced partner, bringing Adam to higher consciousness through her willingness to seek knowledge. The feminine principle, associated with wisdom, Sophia, becomes the agent of salvation rather than damnation. Mandean traditions, stemming from ancient Mesopotamian Gnosticism, describe multiple worlds of light and darkness that souls must navigate on their journey toward liberation. Eden represents one stage in this cosmic journey where souls first became aware of their divine nature despite being trapped in material bodies. Jewish mystical traditions developed their own esoteric interpretations of Eden. The Zohar, primary text of Kabbalah, describes multiple levels of paradise corresponding to different stages of spiritual development. The garden that Adam and Eve inhabited was only the lowest level of a vast hierarchy of spiritual realms extending up to the divine throne itself. Kabbalistic teaching suggests that Adam's soul originally contained all human souls within it, and that his sin fractured this unified consciousness into the multitude individual souls that now populate the earth. The work of spiritual development involves gathering these scattered sparks of divine light back into their original unity. The tree of life in Kabbalistic interpretation becomes the Sephirot, the 10 divine emanations through which infinite divine light manifests in creation. The tree of knowledge represents the realm of good and evil, where divine light appears fragmented and contradictory rather than unified. Eating from this tree means perceiving reality through the lens of separation rather than unity. Some Kabbalistic texts suggest that Adam and Eve were originally androgynous beings, complete within themselves. Their separation into male and female reflected the soul's fall into a state of incompleteness that seeks reunion. Sexual union becomes a sacred act that temporarily restores the original wholeness of the divine image. Islamic mystical traditions offer their own hidden meanings for the garden story. Sufi interpreters see Adam's exile from paradise as the soul's journey away from divine unity into the realm of multiplicity and separation. The spiritual path involves returning to that original state of consciousness, where the soul recognizes its true nature as a mirror of divine attributes. Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi mystic, wrote that paradise and hell exist not as external places, but as states of consciousness determined by the soul's relationship to divine reality. Those who recognize their essential unity with the divine live in paradise, regardless of their external circumstances, while those who experience themselves as separate from God live in the hell of isolation and fear. The Persian Sufi poet Rumi used Eden imagery to describe the soul's love affair with the divine. In his verses, the garden becomes the heart opened to divine love, while exile represents the ego's resistance to surrendering its illusion of separate existence. The return to paradise happens through the dissolution of the false self in the ocean of divine being. Christian mystical traditions developed their own esoteric readings of Eden. Meister Eckhart taught that paradise was humanity's original state of union with God, where the soul knew itself as begotten in the divine mind before the creation of time. The spiritual path involves recovering this pre-temporal awareness, where the soul recognizes its eternal birth in the Godhead. Medieval Christian mystics often interpreted the garden allegorically as the soul itself. The rivers flowing out of Eden represented the 4 cardinal virtues, while the trees symbolize different aspects of spiritual knowledge. The serpent became the ego or false self that tempts the soul away from its center in divine love. Renaissance Hermetic traditions, influenced by ancient Egyptian and Greek mysteries, saw in Eden a symbol of the original Golden Age, when humanity possessed magical powers and direct communication with spiritual beings. The fall represented the loss of this natural magic, while spiritual alchemy offered a path to recover these lost abilities. Alchemical texts often used Eden imagery to describe the stages of spiritual transformation. The garden represented the prima materia, the original pure substance from which all things emerge. The separation of Adam and Eve symbolized the division of this unity into opposing principles that must be reunited through the alchemical work of spiritual development. Modern theosophical and anthroposophical movements have developed evolutionary interpretations of Eden that blend mystical insight with scientific understanding. Rudolf Steiner taught that Adam and Eve represented stages in human consciousness evolution, moving from a dreamlike unity with spiritual worlds toward the development of individual thinking and freedom. Carl Jung's analytical psychology found in Eden imagery archetypal patterns that repeat in every individual's psychological development. The garden represents the unconscious wholeness of childhood, while the fall symbolizes the necessary but painful development of ego consciousness. The return to paradise involves integrating conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche into a new wholeness. Contemporary mystical teachers continue finding new meanings in the ancient story. Some see Eden as representing humanity's future rather than its past, a state of consciousness that the species is evolving toward through spiritual practice and psychological integration. The garden becomes not a lost paradise, but a promise of what humans might become. These esoteric interpretations share common themes despite their diverse cultural origins. They generally view the Eden story as encoding spiritual truths about consciousness, the soul's journey, and humanity's relationship to divine reality. Rather than focusing on moral failure and punishment, they emphasize awakening, transformation, and the recovery of lost spiritual knowledge. The persistence of these hidden interpretations suggests that the Eden story contains layers of meaning that go far beyond its surface narrative. Whether viewed as historical allegory, psychological metaphor, or spiritual instruction, the tale continues to offer insights into the deepest questions of human existence and the soul's quest for meaning and transcendence. Christ as Second Adam, Redemption of the Fall. In the early morning of Christian theology, a pattern emerged that would reshape humanity's understanding of the Eden story. What Adam lost in a garden, another Adam would regain. Where the first man failed, the second would succeed. The exile from paradise would find its answer in a different kind of tree, and death would give way to life. Paul the Apostle first articulated this connection in his letters to the early churches. As in Adam all die, he wrote, so in Christ all will be made alive. Here was a cosmic reversal, a divine do-over that transformed the story of the fall from tragedy into the first chapter of an even greater story of redemption. The parallels between Adam and Jesus became foundational to Christian understanding. Both faced temptation in isolated places. Adam in the garden, Jesus in the wilderness. Both were offered kingdoms and power. Both had to choose between self-will and obedience to the Father. But where Adam grasped for knowledge that wasn't his to take, Jesus emptied himself of divine privilege to embrace human limitation. Early church fathers developed this typology with intricate detail. Justin Martyr noted that as Eve was deceived by a serpent's word, Mary conceived through an angel's announcement. As death came through a tree, life returned through the wood of the cross. The virgin soil from which Adam was formed found its parallel in the virgin womb that bore the new Adam. Irenaeus saw in Christ's life a recapitulation of Adam's story, but with the ending changed. Where Adam was formed from the earth, Christ descended from heaven. Where Adam brought corruption through disobedience, Christ brought healing through submission. The first Adam represented humanity in its fallen state. The second Adam revealed humanity as God intended it to be. The garden imagery threads throughout the gospel stories in ways that early Christians found deeply meaningful. Jesus often taught in gardens and outdoor spaces, as if reclaiming the natural world as a place where divine and human could meet. His agony in Gethsemane echoed Adam's crisis of choice, but with a different outcome. Where Adam hid from God's presence after his disobedience, Jesus pressed forward into the Father's will despite overwhelming anguish. Not my will, but yours be done became the antithesis of the garden's original rebellion. The second Adam succeeded where the first had failed, choosing obedience even unto death. The crucifixion itself became a restoration of the Eden story. Tradition held that Jesus died on Calvary, located on the same site where Adam had been buried. As Adam's sin brought death into the world, Christ's death conquered death itself. The tree that had been humanity's downfall became, in the form of the cross, the instrument of salvation. Medieval art often depicted these connections visually. Paintings showed the cross growing from Adam's skull, or Christ's blood flowing down to touch the bones of the first man. Illuminated manuscripts placed scenes of the fall and the crucifixion side by side, inviting viewers to see the divine reversal that connected them. The resurrection opened possibilities that Eden had not known. Adam had been created with the potential for eternal life, conditional on his continued obedience. But Christ's resurrection offered something more: life that could not be lost again, righteousness that could not be undone, a relationship with God that sin could not break. Paul wrote that believers become new creations in Christ, participants in the life of the second Adam. This wasn't simply a return to Eden's innocence, but an advance to something greater. The knowledge of good and evil that had brought such pain could now be transformed into wisdom. Suffering could become the path to glory. The letter to the Hebrews developed the theme further, presenting Jesus as the forerunner who opens a new and living way into the divine presence. Where cherubim with flaming swords had barred the way back to Eden, Christ's sacrifice tears open the veil that separates earth from heaven. Access to God, lost in the garden, is restored through the cross. Orthodox theology emphasized that Christ assumed human nature in order to heal it from within. Gregory of Nazianzus taught that what is not assumed is not healed, meaning that Christ had to become fully human to repair what the fall had damaged. The incarnation itself began the work of restoration that the cross would complete. The Eastern Church developed the concept of theosis, the idea that humans could participate in divine nature through union with Christ. This went beyond simply returning to Adam's original state. Through the second Adam, humanity could achieve what the first Adam had been created to become: beings who shared fully in the divine life. Augustine connected the doctrine to his understanding of original sin. If Adam's sin had corrupted all his descendants, Christ's righteousness could restore all who were united to him by faith. The solidarity that had worked for condemnation could work equally for salvation. Medieval mystics found in the Adam-Christ parallel a pattern for personal spiritual development. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote of the soul's journey from the innocence of Eden through the knowledge of sin and redemption to the final wisdom that comes from union with God in love. Reformers like Luther emphasized that Christ succeeded where humans inevitably fail. The law given to Adam in the garden and all subsequent divine commands showed human inability to achieve righteousness through works. Only by faith in the second Adam's perfect obedience could anyone hope to stand before God. Calvinist theology developed the concept of federal headship, seeing Adam and Christ as representatives of humanity in different covenants. Adam's failure brought condemnation to all he represented, while Christ's success brought salvation to all who belong to him. The doctrine emphasized both human solidarity and divine justice. Catholic teaching balanced the emphasis on Christ's work with the belief that grace enables human cooperation in salvation. The second Adam's victory makes possible what the first Adam had lost: the ability to choose good and grow in holiness through divine assistance. Modern liberation theologians have seen in the Adam-Christ pattern a model for social transformation. Just as Christ reversed the consequences of the fall, his followers are called to work against systems of oppression that reflect humanity's fallen condition. The kingdom of God represents Eden, restored and transformed. Contemporary evangelicals often emphasize the substitutionary aspect of Christ's work as second Adam. Where Adam failed the test of obedience, Christ passed it perfectly. Where Adam deserved death, Christ died in his place. The exchange allows Adam's children to receive credit for Christ's righteousness, while Christ bears the penalty for their sin. Process theologians have suggested that God's experience of suffering in Christ represents the divine participation in creation's struggle to overcome the effects of the fall. Rather than simply canceling the consequences of Eden, God works within history to bring forth new possibilities for life and love. The second Adam theme continues to shape Christian worship and spirituality. Baptism is understood as dying and rising with Christ, participating in his reversal of Adam's fall. Communion recalls the tree of life that was lost in Eden but restored through Christ's sacrifice. The Christian calendar reflects this pattern, with Easter's celebration of resurrection answering Good Friday's remembrance of death. just as Christ's obedience answers Adam's disobedience. The liturgical year becomes a yearly retelling of the story that moves from paradise lost to paradise regained. In Christian hope, the work of the second Adam points toward a final restoration that will surpass even Eden's glory. The book of Revelation speaks of a new heaven and new earth where the tree of life grows again, but now its fruit is available to all who enter the holy city. The garden becomes a city, the couple becomes a multitude, and the story that began with exile ends with eternal welcome. The figure of Christ as second Adam thus transforms the entire meaning of the Eden story. What began as humanity's tragic loss becomes the necessary prelude to an even greater gift. The fall, while real and devastating, becomes, in Christian understanding, not the end of the story, but the dark middle chapter that makes possible an ending more glorious than any beginning. Echoes of Eden, paradise remembered. Something deep within the human heart remembers paradise. It surfaces in unexpected moments, the perfect stillness of dawn breaking over water, the trust in a child's eyes, the wordless understanding between lovers. We carry Eden within us like a half-remembered song, beautiful but incomplete, calling us towards something we've never quite experienced but somehow know we've lost. This memory shapes our deepest longings. Every garden we plant whispers of that first garden. Every sanctuary we build reaches toward that original holy place. We arrange flowers and cultivate beauty because something in our souls recalls a time when beauty was effortless, when harmony was natural, when the gap between what is and what should be didn't exist. The word paradise itself carries this ancient ache. Borrowed from Persian into Greek and then into dozens of languages, it originally meant a walled garden, an enclosed space of protection and delight. Kings and nobles throughout history have created paradises, attempting to recover through art and architecture what was lost through disobedience. Children seem closest to Eden's memory. Watch them play in natural settings, and you glimpse something of that original innocence. They speak to animals without embarrassment, find faces in clouds, trust in goodness with a faith that experience will eventually erode. Perhaps this is why Jesus said the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. They remember what adults have forgotten. Lovers, too, taste something of paradise in their union. The vulnerability and trust of intimate love echoes Adam's joy at finding Eve, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. In moments of perfect communion, couples experience a unity that transcends individuality, a harmony that feels both completely natural and miraculously rare. Music opens another window into paradise. Certain melodies, particular harmonies, the perfect silence between notes, these transport us momentarily beyond the world of conflict and limitation. Composers throughout history have attempted to capture celestial music. That song, the morning stars sang together when the foundations of the earth were laid. Great literature returns repeatedly to themes of innocence lost and paradise sought. From Virgil's Golden Age to Shakespeare's magical forests, from Tolkien's Shire to Morrison's beloved community, writers create fictional worlds that feel somehow more real than reality, places where love conquers fear and beauty triumphs over ugliness. The environmental movement draws much of its passion from this remembered paradise. Our grief over polluted rivers and clear-cut forests isn't just practical concern for resources. It's mourning for a broken relationship between humanity and the natural world. Every effort to preserve wilderness carries hope for restoration, a return to right relationship with the earth. Science fiction and fantasy genres repeatedly imagine perfect worlds, utopian societies, planets where harmony reigns. From Star Trek's Federation to Ursula K. Le Guin's Dispossessed, these stories express humanity's stubborn refusal to accept that paradise is impossible. We keep imagining better worlds because some part of us remembers that better is not only possible but natural. Religious and spiritual traditions worldwide testify to this universal longing. Buddhism speaks of nirvana, a state beyond suffering. Hinduism describes Sat Chit Ananda, existence consciousness bliss, as the soul's true nature. Islam promises jannah, gardens beneath which rivers flow. Indigenous traditions honor Mother Earth as sacred provider, remembering when humans lived in grateful partnership with the land. Even secular philosophies carry echoes of paradise. Marx's classless society, where each gives according to ability and receives according to need, envisions economic relationships freed from the competition and exploitation that mark fallen human nature. Humanistic psychology's concept of self actualization suggests humans have natural potential for growth and fulfillment that society often frustrates. Modern technology paradoxically both distances us from and brings us closer to paradise. Virtual reality creates artificial Edens where anything is possible, but these digital paradises highlight our separation from physical creation. Social media connects us globally while often increasing our sense of isolation and comparison. Yet technology also offers new possibilities for restoration. Renewable energy systems work with natural processes rather than against them. Biomimicry learns from creation's own designs. Genetic research holds potential for healing hereditary diseases that reflect the brokenness we've inherited from our first parents. The phenomenon of nostalgia reveals how deeply the memory of paradise marks human consciousness. We romanticize childhood, simpler times, golden ages that probably never existed quite as we remember them. This isn't merely psychological dysfunction, but spiritual homesickness, the soul's recognition that it belongs to a better country. Art and beauty serve as constant reminders of what we've lost and what we hope to regain. A sunset that stops us in our tracks, a piece of music that moves us to tears, a work of art that captures something ineffable. These experiences suggest that beauty isn't just decoration, but revelation, glimpses of the glory that once filled creation. Human rituals around birth, marriage, and death carry echoes of paradise. We celebrate new life as miraculous gift, honor love as sacred bond, and mourn death as unnatural interruption. These responses suggest deep knowledge that life should be blessed, love should be permanent, and death should not have dominion. The search for meaning that characterizes human existence reflects our displaced condition. Animals don't seem to struggle with existential questions, but humans constantly ask why they exist, what their purpose is, whether their lives matter. These questions arise because we remember, however dimly, being known and loved and needed in a place where our purpose was clear. Dreams often carry us back toward paradise. In sleep, we visit landscapes more beautiful than any we've seen, meet people who know us completely, experience love without fear and joy without shadow. Some dismiss these as mere neural static, but perhaps they're glimpses of our true home, previews of the restoration to come. The universal human experience of feeling like strangers in the world points back to Eden. We build houses but long for home, accumulate possessions but remain unsatisfied, achieve success but find it hollow. This restlessness suggests we're made for something more than this broken world can offer. Hope itself testifies to paradise remembered. Despite overwhelming evidence of human fallibility and cosmic indifference, we continue believing things can get better. This hope isn't rational. It's based on memory deeper than experience, knowledge older than learning, faith in goodness that no amount of evil can entirely extinguish. The story of Eden endures because it names something everyone recognizes but few can articulate. It gives language to our deepest intuitions about what life should be like: peaceful, abundant, beautiful, whole. It explains why the world feels wrong without making us despair that it always will. In the end, the memory of paradise serves not to torture us with what we cannot have, but to orient us toward what we were made for. It keeps alive the vision of harmony between creature and creator, between humans and nature, between what is and what ought to be. Every glimpse of beauty, every experience of love, every moment of peace reminds us that paradise isn't just ancient history or distant hope. It lives wherever hearts recognize truth, hands create beauty, and voices speak words that heal rather than harm. The garden may be lost, but its memory guides us toward the city that is to come, where the tree of life grows again and the river of life flows freely for all who thirst.